All right. Now, at one point in time, the mind of humanity suddenly experienced a dramatic and fundamental shift, much like an earthquake of human consciousness, with its aftershocks still shaking us today every time we ponder the nature of reality. The origins of this sudden interest in the nature of reality, as parsed out from pure and utter superstition and hearsay and long established tradition, arrived from a group of often forgotten Greeks who are not even living in Greece, but most of them living along the western shores of what is now Turkey, thriving from the 6th into the 5th century BCE. As if waking up from a deep slumber, a new intelligence now peered out behind the eyes of those known as the natural philosophers, who outright rejected mythology as the ultimate explanation for why the universe was the way it was and instead sought out rational explanations. They wanted to know the origin of things, what the essential building blocks of the universe were, and how to prove what they speculated, often through mathematical deductions, from such men as Thales and Anaximander and Eximenes and Pythagoras and Heraclitus and Empedocles and Leucippe, arrived everything from belief that water was the basic element for all life and the concept of the evolution of humanity to the profession that the universe was always in flux and all things were created out of atoms. We will get to personally know each one of these philosophers who came up with all these ideas, getting to know their stories because I am a historian. I'm interested in those stories too. And they're often odd individuals, but I have to tell you, they're always entertaining. Despite professing ideas separate from religion, religious ideas did manage to emerge from time to time. For example, the conception of the idea known as the Logos, which will later become part of Philo of Alexandria and then the Gospel of John. The journey and nature of the human soul, the belief in the transmigration of souls. Yes, that's right. Reincarnation that's found amongst the Greco-Roman world. That's interesting, right? And of course, the essential power of the four elements: earth, air, fire, water. Today, or tonight, depending where you're at, we will explore the very essence of what makes up our society today and provide exact reasons for why this sudden ancient great awakening of the human mind came about and why it came about in the first place. And in this particular location, you will leave with precise reasons why we think the way we do right now, even as you hear my description. And realize without these pre Socratic philosophers, there would be no sophisticated Roman Empire with its ideas of natural law, no Renaissance, no Enlightenment, no scientific age in the West. So prepare for your minds to be blown, but in a good way, right? So let's go. Let's start it all out. Of course, before we proceed and discuss the origins of philosophy, we have to define exactly what philosophy really is by definition. I always believe in defining my terms. And of course, this brings us immediately to the Greeks. For the word philosophy is a Greek word meaning the love, philea, of wisdom, Sophia, right? According to the Greeks themselves, the second century CE Diogenes Laertius himself states in his Lives of Eminent Philosophers the following concerning the definition of philosophy, which is written for an ancient audience. So I want you to understand their meaning of philosophy first, and then we'll go into our meaning, because I like to do that, contextually speaking. Okay, so basically, philosophy has three parts. You have physics, ethics, and dialectic. So I'm actually reading from this source from the third century CE. So he says physics is the part concerned with the universe. and all that it contains. Ethics is that what concerns with life and all that has to do with us. And while the processes of reasoning, he says, employed by both the forms are the dialectic. Physics flourished down, he says, to the time of Archelaus. Ethics, as we have said, he says, started with Socrates, while dialectic goes as far back as Zeno of Elea. So, in general, philosophy is the umbrella term for physics, ethics, and the dialectic or logic. So, first of all, let's go into physics a little bit. Physics derives from the Greek word um, um, physique, which means nature, but often includes the idea of episteme. Episteme, too, of course, episteme means knowledge. So essentially, the subdivision of philosophy focuses on the knowledge of nature. This means physics is the study of the material universe that includes investigating matter and how it moves through both time and space. Ideas connected to energy and force is examined under this term. Ethics, of course, means the idea of custom or habit and defines itself as moral philosophy, investigating ideas concerning what is right or what is wrong conduct. The word, of course, word logic is from the Greek word logete, which possessed of reason, intellectual dialectic, and argumentative. And it's directly connected to the word logos, which, of course, the famous Greek dictionary Liddell and Scott defines as word, thought, idea, argument, account, reason, or principle. The idea of dialectic in connection to logic is a method of reasoning towards a resolution of a disagreement through a very rational discussion. And we need more rational discussions more now than ever, right? Today. Modern writers have added a few more. They've added metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology, which, of course, the ancients did indeed include under philosophy, but was not so clearly defined until later on. Metaphysics is derived from the Greek preposition meta, meaning beyond or upon or after. So basically, it is nature, but it is beyond nature, right? In essence, it is the science of the world that is beyond nature. Epistemology now derives from the Greek word episteme, meaning knowledge. We talked about that. Finally, axiology is deriving from the word axia, meaning worth or value. And so this is the study of the worthiness of knowledge, how important and practical it can be. Socrates, for example, saw a relation between knowledge creating virtue, resulting in morality, and frankly, maybe a better democracy too, right? But when did this, here it goes, here's the big drum roll, when did this self-conscious realization of the philosophical notions of physics, ethics, and logic, alongside of metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology, when did this come about? We must state that all of these words, of course, are Greek, and so the defining divisions will also be, well, Greek as well. But when did the mind of humanity first stir to view the world around them in a critical manner? As we have already known, it was those known as the pre-Socratic philosophers that were thriving from 600 to 450 BCE that provided critical subdivisions for the ideas concerning philosophy in the first place. There is no question about it that these Greek philosophers began to see the universe as rational more than mythological, establishing ideas in relation to some form of natural law. Furthermore, we know that from such philosophers as Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, that the division of this is becoming understood as a science. But as for the actual origins of philosophy and its many categories, that's another question altogether. Now, if we were to ask the Greeks themselves, we'll start with the Greeks themselves, and they'll give you one answer. I'm not saying it's the right answer, so hold up. Where philosophy came from, some would claim that others before them came up with the idea. As Diogenes Laertius states in the Lives of Eminent Philosophers, there are some who say that the study of philosophy had its beginning amongst the barbarians. They urge that the Persians have had their magi, the Babylonians or Assyrians, their Chaldeans, and the Indians, their gymnosophists. And amongst the Celts and Gauls, I'm actually reading from the primary source. Amongst the Celts and Gauls, there are people called Druids or Holy Ones, for which they cite as authorities. So even the source mentions Aristotle says it's an authority, and Sotion in the 23rd book of a succession on philosophers. Also, they say that Mochus was a Phoenician and Zamolocus a Thracian and Atlas a Libyan. So the idea is they're admitting that philosophy could come from some other places. But many other Greeks, besides Diogenes Laertius, believe that the Greeks were the first to appear upon the earth, as they will always do that. Then the logic ran. They must have discovered philosophy in the first place. So Diogenes continues. He says, these authors forget that the achievements which they attribute to the barbarians belong to the Greeks, with whom not merely philosophy, but the human race itself began. So you see this central idea, central arc here. The Greeks were the center of the universe. You see this a lot in all these different cultures. For instance, they say Musaeus is claimed by Athens as the one who came up with philosophy. He says Linus by Thebes. It is said, he says, of the former, this is referring to Musaeus, the son of Eumolpus, was the first to compose a genealogy of the gods and to construct a sphere, and that he maintained that all things proceed from unity and are resolved again into unity. It's pretty convenient to do that. Musaeus is interesting. First of all, he's really just a semi-mythical polymath that apparently came up with a long list of innovations that he most likely did not do. But the Greeks were trying to lay claim to many beliefs and ideas before, well, everybody else. He was said to be a seer, a prophet, a priest, a poet, a musician, a historian, a philosopher. Oh, and he invented the hexameter. It is said that he helped to author some of the mystic rites of Demeter and Eleusis, but nobody knows when he lived. He's in Athens. Nobody knows when he died. They just say, well, he's before Homer. Um, I don't know about you, but that doesn't make me feel very comfortable as a primary source, right? So I'm going to say maybe we shouldn't ask the Greeks where philosophy came from. Let's see a show of hands, right? It's Musaeus. He did it, or Linus. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, even amongst the Greeks who believed that they came up with philosophy first, they could not deny that the thinkers from Persia and India were both inspirational to certain aspects of philosophy, making important contributions. So concerning the Persians, Diogenes Laertius states, with the art of magic, they were wholly unacquainted, according to Aristotle, in his Magius. Uh, um, and he tells us the name is Zoroaster, literally interpreted as star worshiper, and Hermodorus agrees with that. So they're saying that philosophy is starting with the Magi. We're going to go and see an image. So let's go there real quick. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so this is an image of a Magi. And so the Magi were ones that are claimed by many to have come up with the idea of philosophy. And so, of course, it's interesting that the Magi, these are the priests of Zoroastrianism. They're the priests of Zoroastrianism then. They are also the priests of Zoroastrianism now. They still exist. I don't know why people forget. Today they're called Mobots, but the priesthood still exists. These priests of Zoroastrianism, they were practitioners of astronomy, astrology, esoteric ideas, the occult. They are first mentioned in an inscription from Darius the First, who actually lived between 550 to 486, Persia. So they date back to that time, and it's interesting because the Magi, they practice this exotica, these kinds of rituals that were seen as strange, as odd, as outside of what a Greek and later a Roman would understand. So they call these arts magic. And of course, the Greeks, the Romans, will call their own idea goes or some other words, just ritual actions, right? But later on, they'll kind of transfer this word from just simply the Zoroastrian practice of this magi work or magic, and they'll transfer it over to any kind of exotic actions done by the other, other than ourselves. Then later on, of course, they start to adopt the term themselves, but sometimes it's used as a negative term. So it just depends on the context and where you are geographically. But yes, so the Magi, and we see that some of these philosophers, these pre-Socratic philosophers, do go to the East, and they do specifically mention the fact that they meet with those who are in Persia or in Babylon, and they will actually do mention the Magi. So this is a distinct possibility. In fact, we'll go a little bit further into this in a few moments. Let's go to the next one. I love this image here. Remember, of course, the Magi. We find them referenced in the New Testament, right? Those who visit Jesus, right? These are the Magi. So these would be priests, the high priests of Zoroastrianism. But I love this particular image. Let's go to the next one. And you can't see much of this, but these are they mentioned India, they mentioned those known as the gymnosophists. So this is mentioned by ancient writers that the wisdom is coming from a gymnosophist. What is that? Well, sophists, of course, Sophia, that simply is wise men. So gymno or gymno, what does that mean? It means naked. So these are naked wise men. So these are the Indian philosophers who often practiced self-denial. We know that for a fact, these gymnosophists, described as gymnosophists, were not just in India, but they traveled the various routes all the way to the Greek, all the way to the Roman world, and people saw them in places like Alexandria and Athens, and even in the mix in Rome. The gymnosophists, they traveled pretty far, but you can't see much in this image, but apparently he's not wearing much. But there you have it. Next image. Also, another stream of influence is most definitely from the Egyptians. Even the Greeks admit that. Diogenes Laertius says the philosophy of the Egyptians is described as follows, so far as it relates to the gods and to justice. They say that matter was the first principle. Next, the four elements were derived from matter, and thus living things of every species were produced. So this is what Diogenes Laertius is saying of the beliefs of the Egyptians, and these beliefs will then be adopted by the Greeks. He continues, the sun and the moon are gods, bearing the names of Osiris and Isis, respectively. They make use of the beetle, the dragon, the hawk, and other creatures as symbols of divinity. This is, of course, according to Manetho, right? in his physical doctrines of the and also on Egyptian philosophy, Manetho. They also set up statues and temples to those sacred animals because they do not know the true form of the deity. They hold that the universe is created and perishable, and that it is spherical in shape. Interesting, right? They say that the stars consist of fire, and that accordingly, as the fire is in them is mixed, so events happen upon the earth. That the moon is eclipsed when it falls into the earth's shadow. That the soul survives death and passes into other bodies. Well, yeah. Well, that's interesting. That'd be reincarnation. That rain is caused by change in the atmosphere. Of all other phenomena, they give physical explanations, as related by Hecataeus and Aristogoras. They also lay down laws on the subject of justice, which they ascribe to Hermes. That would be Thoth. Also, Hermes Trismegistus, right? And they deified these animals which are serviceable to man. They also claim to have invented geometry, astronomy, and arithmetic, thus much concerning the invention of philosophy, unquote. So, this particular paragraph is really heavily contested by Egyptologists, and I can understand why. Why the concept of reincarnation is very much, on the periphery. We do know that there's some belief and some perspectives of Egyptians that seem to indicate aspects of that. Still, you still have a situation whereby, um, uh, uh, how do I say this? Whereby it's still questionable. Because it seems to me that the Egyptian focus is upon the afterlife and the endless aspect of living in this beautiful heaven-like place where the north wind blows, and areas where you have your own Ushabtis figure serving you, and your cats. And it just seems like the Book of the Dead is kind of going one way destination. And of course, even the way into the heart ceremony, it's like condemned, being swallowed by a mitt, or going, or if you're lighthearted on the scales, you go into this wonderful place. So there's some indication of it. There is, but it's just not as strong. The idea that the earth is a sphere, the Egyptians really see it as a great holy mountain Aton that kind of spits out Shu, and Tefnut, and creates the world out of and of course he cries when they come back and the tears become humanity, right? The point of the matter is that this seems to be a Greek interpretation of what they think Egyptians think. But it really isn't. Next image. It really isn't that great of context, contextual studies. So, but we are entering the axial age. So here we go. The evidence proves that philosophy grew out of a confluence of different ideas that emerged during the axial age. Now, you can see this is kind of the overview, but of course the type is very small. But we're going to go to the next image, and it gets a little closer to focus in on Earth. There we go. And you can see there, if you can, right? And you can see that there's a whole bunch living within the same century. This is called the axial age. In general, the 8th through the 6th century BCE was a very restless, transformative, and rebellious period in the development of religion, with religion gaining a new and often critical partner that is best labeled as philosophy. For no longer was it simply enough to enact a ritual, to placate the gods and spirits or whatever supernatural forces it may be. The rational aspect mandated explanation, a discourse on the reasons why such a ritual was performed. This was now expected, in fact, even demanded. Of course, philosophical notions in regards to religious perspectives was an amazing current that was sweeping from east to west and west to east. The fervent wellspring of inspiration leaving its legacy behind with individuals such as Confucius. Now, listen to these dates. Confucius, when is he said to have lived? 551 to 479. Okay. Who founded Confucianism? Lao Tzu, 604 to 531. Who founded Taoism? Hey, that's kind of the same century. Mahavira, 599 to 527 BCE. Who founded Jainism? Hey, that's also the 500s. And Buddha, 563 to 483, founding Buddhism. All four of them live in the 6th century, the 500s. The very same century seen the explosion of philosophical knowledge in ancient Greece, actually mostly arising from the settlements by the Greeks along the Ionian coast, with such great thinkers as Thales. Well, what is Thales living? 624 to 546. Anaximander, 610 to 546. Anaximenes, 585 to 528. He's from Miletus. Pythagoras, 570 to 495 from Samos. Heraclitus, 535 to 475 from Ephesus. Are you seeing this? They're all from the same century. Their ideas directly, let's look at me for a little bit. Their ideas directly affected the shape of religion and religion to come throughout the Mediterranean world, all the way, all the way to through the Middle East, all the way through India, all the way through China. To say this utter redefinition of religious expression through philosophical inquiry, all happening within the same century, was a mere coincidence, would be an excuse in a lack of knowledge of how history and historical processes work, of the progression of innovations that were sweeping via the trade routes from Greece to China, as evidenced not only through written records, but through archaeological evidence of how these ideas dramatically affected local artwork and designs. And wandering along these very roads were traveling mystics and ascetics, sharing their religious and philosophical wares as much as traveling tradesmen were sharing their selections of spices and herbs and rare ointments. It is also no mere coincidence that two of the major revolutionaries during this period just happened to be numbered amongst those sojourners of spiritual expressions known as Shramanas. Shramana, this is a those who were just journeying around, who travel. That happens to be Mahavira of Jainism and Buddha, well, of course, of Buddhism. Robert Lester notes that the Shramanas, meaning strivers, were homeless wanderers, monks who rejected the settled worldly life, preferring to live on the fringe of society, where they inhabited the forests, living on alms, seeking wisdom through physical renunciation and meditation, unquote. While the Shramanas may have initially derived from Indian subcontinent, they did not stay there, but wandered all about Asia, and as we know from direct documents, even the Mediterranean world as well. They dared to question the status quo religious system, so steeped in the traditions of ritual without explanation, for it was often opposed by the various religious hierarchies that one was not to question the gods or spirits, but to just do what they say to maintain the fundamental balance of society. To question, to think outside the box, was to erode the very fabric of the cosmos. In India, a belief system known as Brahmanism, which was dominated by the elite Indo-European hierarchy of priests, was a dominant local religious system up until the 6th century BCE. And here, spiritual leadership was passed through birth rather than election, that you were either born to a class that was permitted to receive revelation from the gods and spirits with authority or not. The shamanas sought the democratization of religious and spiritual ideas, of personal, individual religious expression, and a direct explanation for why the world operates the way it does. And so, hence, philosophical expression. The Shermanas were a key element. So you're going to see, even in amongst the Greeks, you're going to see some very interesting ideas that start to pop up. But is that all? Oh no. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. So here we go. Ready? All right. Still, all of these converging ideas did not simply appear. For earlier fundamental shifts were occurring, um, and they were occurring uh, way, way, way earlier. Well, how early do we get? Well, here we go. There's a late Bronze Age collapse. Oh, that's a little early. Yeah. So during the 12 into the 1100s, you have this great collapse. There's many reasons for it, but all these civilizations fell. Some people claim this is the area of the Eastern Mediterranean, which is, of course, East Europe, Asia, Egypt, and so forth. Some will blame the sea people. Some will blame ironworking, climate change, drought, changes in styles of warfare, volcanoes. I mean, you always have to have that. But anyway, long and the short of it is that civilization just kind of blacked out. You got the Egyptians; they're severely weakened, and so during the New Kingdom period, they have about a century before they just kind of peter out. They still exist, but they spend now just being conquered by various groups. Everybody from those from the south to those who are Assyrians to Persians and so forth, bounced around Hellenistic empires and so forth, yada yada. Got it. Hittites are gone. Much of the countries along the Levant are destroyed. The Mitanni and others. I mean, it's a blackout. And for the Mycenaeans, these are the Greeks. Yeah, they fall too. Some people say that they contributed to the problem, like half of them being sea people themselves. Other people say no. The point is, the Mycenaeans, which are the Greeks, fall, and so the Greeks face a 400-year blackout. In fact, much of the world at that time, you have the fall of literacy, the fall of cities, civilization as you know it fell. And so, what was the worldview during this time? Well, it was a continuation of an earlier worldview known as the continuous cosmos. So let's look at some images here. I think we'll see the tail end of the religions part, but that's cool. So you can see all the various religions that happened during the Axial Age. I love the Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Upanishadic Hinduism, Greek philosophy, Confucianism, Taoism, prophetic Judaism, right? You see there with the Levant. So the Babylonian captivity, and so this is revolution of all these religions during one short period of time. Next image. And also want to here's of course the fall of during the late Bronze Age collapse. So you can see much of this area is falling, it's destroyed. So you got to kind of sweep away before something new comes about. Next image. So continuous cosmos. So what will happen is civilization was there, it gets blacked out, and basically people return to where they were before these civilizations really formed. So kind of going back to a Paleolithic, Neolithic kind of age kind of thinking, and so as well as others. And so you have this idea of a continuous cosmos. And so for them, the only difference between the natural and sacred worlds was by degree. The difference between you and the gods is, well, they had more power. They were able to live forever, which is a great benefit. Gilgamesh wanted that, didn't happen, right? But they acted very human. they were just kind of mirrors of ourselves in many ways. Look at the Mesopotamian gods, right? Just kind of mirroring us. Many of them are anthropomorphic, but there are few are zoomorphic, but they acted very human. They're erratic like humans. The universe was cyclical, with order and chaos mixed. Nature was like the gods, kind at one moment and then kind of violent the next, because they understood their gods, their goddesses, their spirits as being congruent with nature. In fact, in many cases, so therefore, because nature goes through various changes, right? The seasons, you got the winter, right? And you go into the spring, and then you go summer and fall. Well, you know, so sometimes times are too cold, sometimes times are too hot. Sometimes you starve, sometimes you have times of plenty. It seems to be in nature, and because they see their spirituality in nature and as an aspect of themselves, right? Their understanding of these deities are within that context, right? So you have these notions. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily a negative thing, because the idea is that what you're trying to do and what these societies are trying to do is to figure out how to get into the rhythm of the continuous cosmos. Because if you get into that rhythm, if you get into that circle, so to speak, to understand the wheel of the year, to understand the rules that seem to govern the natural world, guess what? You're successful and you happen to love your gods. For example, the Egyptians love their gods. Why? Because they figured out the Nile River, that, hey, it floods. Well, that seems to be bad. Well, brings rich black silt, every September, October, and it covers the land and it makes it great for growing. And all of a sudden, it's not like flooding us. It's given us renewed soil so that we can thrive. And so they figured things out. See how that works? So as long as you get into the rhythm, it's still circular, which means time is also circular. There's no linear thought. There's always this idea of this ever present continuous idea of now. It's the ever present. No future, no past. It's just a circle going around and around and around, right? Well, then there's a few things that change. Next image that leads to philosophy. It's called psychotechnology. It says here, we evolved to use tools. In that sense, we are natural born cyborgs. I like this. Our clothes, our objects, our tools, we enhanced ourselves with biologically. I'm going to use this in another way. And that is that what we do is that we are defined by the tools that we make. We feel like we make the tools, but the tools make us, right? So the Paleolithic age, for example, Paleolithic age, it starts with the advent of making stone tools. It ends with the advent of agriculture. And as archaeologists, we take a look at what people make as tools in the material culture, and that tells us where people are when it comes to their mental development. So we take a look and we see at first, the earlier part, we see that they make tools that look just like the natural world. They call this the mimetic period of time. And so basically, it just looks simply, they mime, they mimic. Not a lot going on here, probably because people are living to be the ripe old age of 15 to 20 years of age. So there's no accumulation of knowledge. And so basically, they take a rock, they break it up a few times, and it becomes used for digging, or it be used for a weapon to knock your enemy on the head, bludgeon, whatever. The point of the matter is mimetic. The next era is conceptual. All of a sudden, we take a look at the stone tools and we realize there's concepts in there. This tool is meant for hunting. This tool is meant for catching fish. This tool is meant for gathering various kinds of plants and so forth. Got it? So concepts, just like a little kid, a baby, you mime, it's mimetic, like, aha, You smile, the kid smiles. There's a mirror effect, right? That's what humans were. That's how advanced we were. We move from that to concepts, just like a little kid. We get concepts. The next is abstract thought. Now we have symbols and spirals, and so we're able to have symbols, and we're changing as a result because now we're learning how to read symbols, and that helps advance our brains, right? So from there, we go to that's the mythic linguistic period of time, where now all of a sudden these symbols, these signs, they start going in the sequence, and we start telling stories, stories that are memorized. And so we have the rudiments of some sort of concept of language and some sort of way of trying to kind of tip us off what it means. So symbols, although can mean many things to whoever's looking at it. So that's what happens. But now something really amazing occurs. Next image. And that is alphabetic literacy. Something happens to our brain with alphabetic literacy. Um, alphabetic literacy, unlike you have with the Egyptians with the hieroglyphs, unlike you have the cuneiform with of course the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Sure, those are great; those are symbols, but now they're starting to move into phonetics, which is fine. But with alphabet, there's a standardization sequence that has a beginning and an end. It starts ABC, maybe, or it ends at a certain place. It's not circular. It's very linear, right? So what happens here is that writing now becomes more accessible through writing. So it really does. It stretches our cognitive abilities across space and time. We can now record our earlier thoughts from a week or a month or a year ago and apply it to a situation or a problem right now, right? So now we can have the accumulation of knowledge. We can build on it. Next image. And then, of course, we start moving from first order thinking to second order thinking. The first order thinking, of course, is an initial, intuitive, and often simplistic way that most people approach decisions. But at this time, this is the way they did it. They consider the immediate and obvious effects of a choice. It often leads to straightforward binary decisions based on short-term gains and losses, and confines us to get the same results as everyone else. This is first order thinking. Yeah, we have that today too. But the point is, oh, that sounds familiar. No, stop. This is the this is an earlier period of time. I get myself in trouble. So what happens is that we move to with writing, we move to second order thinking. Second order thinking involves a more complex and nuanced analysis with deliberate and logical thinking. It considers not only the immediate consequences of a decision, but also the potential ripple effects, unintended consequences, and the broader context. It takes into account how various actors and variables interact and how decisions can affect the future. It separates great thinkers from the ordinary who outperform others. So this is second order thinking. And so what happens is with the alphabet, with literacy, there's a knowledge and awareness of our own cognition. There is no philosophy without this. Dramatic pause. That's right. You have to get here. It's hard to have a philosophy. Sure, the Egyptians have philosophy. They have a philosophical way in certain ways. Sometimes, because as I mentioned before, it goes in fits and starts, right? Remember I mentioned the Paleolithic, Neolithic age, and later on, and then you had this little period of time where civilization seemed to be grasping it, the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians. So it seems like, well, we're getting there, we're getting close, and all of a sudden, boom, everything falls again with the collapse of the Bronze Age. So we're back to square one amongst many civilizations, not all civilizations, but quite a few. And so we're building up again. And but now with the alphabet, armed with the alphabet, it becomes even more efficient than you had with the Egyptians, which were kept to more of the upper elites. And you're going, well, arguably, they would be upper elites even this later period. Sort of, maybe not, because the point is there's more people who are literate, but there's also more people who, because of the system, they have access to literacy. What do you mean by that? Like secondhand access? Yes, because unlike today, where we have lots of forms of entertainment, ancient humanity had not less to do. And so they like to be read to. They like to hear speeches. They like to hear stories. Even hello, the Iliad and the Odyssey, which of course were not written down till later on. Homer, who composed these, they listen to these stories. They love stories, and so yeah, so access to literacy can also be secondhand, and people don't even know that. But anyway, moving right along. But second order thinking makes us self-critical. It makes us self-aware. We can detect patterns of distortion to fix them by taking in a more expansive and inclusive view built upon the accumulated knowledge of the world. We now have moved from a cyclical worldview to a linear worldview, just like the alphabet lined up, right? And we move into this idea that there is, yes, there's an alpha and the omega. There's a beginning, there's an end, right? And that we have a past, we have a future, and the past is recorded. History can be born as a result, right? It can exist. We can grasp it, right? But then, of course, a few other things happen. Next image. Let's sure if I have an image here. Yes. So now we have an interesting situation, which is fundamental for the origins of philosophy. And that is, well, now that you have you cognitively thought of that there's, these, there's a linear world that we are maybe heading somewhere. And now that we have this measuring stick of how things should be, how things should look, we start gaining something which is kind of scary. It's called idealism. Ideaism. And so we get this idea that hey, we can measure up and be this abstract higher level, which leads to the two separate world concept, that you have this world that we live in, our everyday world, which is messy, it's disorganized, it's chaotic, it's material, maybe full of deception. But now that we have this idealism that's in our brains, right? Now we have this abstract notion that things could be better. We actually have what they understand as the real world, which is free of deception, free of these distortions of reality. I would do it. Next image. And so you have this separation between the two. Well, what will happen is, are you following? What will happen is that, well, then, remember ancient humanity thought, hey, when it comes to the afterlife, it's going to look just like, well, our life now. But now what will happen is that they'll think to themselves, well, the afterlife will look like something completely different. It'll be this idealized, perfect world. It will be something, and of course, this allows, you can see how this works, all the way from Theos on, right? They have this is the world that we live in, but there's an abstract world out there, and some will have it configured in different ways, and made out of different ideas, right? And some will say there's math behind it all, right? Mathematical equations. But you do have separate worlds, right? And so because you're striving to go somewhere. You're striving to evolve somewhere. How we doing? Okay, good. So you can see now we're ready for philosophy. See how I gave a nice context there, right? Next image. But with all this said, philosophy, as we have come to understand it, while derived from earlier societies, is still aspects of it are, of course, uniquely Greek. But not they didn't come. They came from everywhere, right? So they created much of their own unique political and social and religious applications when it comes to philosophy. Now, the environment of Greece, let's take a look here, is said to have contributed to the emergence of philosophy for their land was not exactly fertile. And because of the diverse topography, with many communities and valleys separated by sharp hills, there was this curious tension between a sense of individual isolation between the various city states, that is, and yet a need to trade with one another to compensate for their lack of resources. So, hence, they had to cooperate, but they also had to compete to survive because of their strategic location in the Mediterranean, with harbors everywhere along their coastline. Trade further afield was natural, So now, because of the suffering experienced during the Greek Dark Age, following the perceived glorious Mycenaean era, which is, of course, pre-fall of the Bronze Age, the Greeks had lost much of their previous traditions. They lost their identity. They sought just the essentials. They want to have a roof over their heads. They want to have food on the table, and they want clothes to wear. They were forced to be creative to survive. And so they started to experiment with different ideas, constantly adapting to their hostile environment. Next image, I believe. Okay, so as a result, political changes came about out of necessity, with the Greeks gradually overthrowing their kings. They start with, well, so start with the kings, and after that, they realize the wealthy people, the rich people, the aristocrats will go, hey, you know what? We have all the resources. We're the ones who backed the kings in the first place. So why don't we take over? And so they overthrow the kings, and you have aristocracies, right? And then a group of them go, hey, just because you're wealthy uh, doesn't mean that you're able to rule. But a few of us, we're wealthy, but we know how to rule. So, hey, and so now we have oligarchies, right? And then you have, some kind of terrible thing happening. And the oligarchs or others are not really prepared for it. There's a battle, there's a flood, there's a famine, and so they look for anybody that can help out. And so a commoner will rise up and say, "Hey, I can help out. I'll take over because this is an emergency." And of course, that's the birth of a tyranny, a tyrant. Tyrants are not always bad. They were just, but they're looked at as bad because what happened is once this average Joe takes over, he's in charge, and the crisis is over. Whatever it is, the war is won, the plague has stopped, whatever it may be. Um, the economy is back. Then they go, hey, we want rich people in charge again. So what they do is they try to get rid of the tyrant, and the tyrant then spends his whole time killing or doing various things to stay in power because he realizes he has two choices: stay in power or be dead. So that's where the tyranny tyrant bad name comes from. And then, of course, finally they go, hey, you know what? If this common guy can rule for us, then maybe commoners can rule together on a consensus. And then guess what you have now? Yeah, that's right. You got democracy. So this is kind of things, but this is again an aspect that contributes to philosophy. I told you I want to give you enough exact reasons why it came about, and I'm giving you a whole bunch of material. So I hope that's okay. So without doubt, politics focus upon public debate in the marketplace. This is a example of a agora, a marketplace in Corinth, and you see it right here. So public debate is important. That means that strategies were needed to convince those who are listening on why their ideas are important, which of course encouraged those who are listening critical thinking, and those who are also coming up with these ideas critical thinking, those in power. And so to gain power to be voted in, they have to be able to explain why they should be elected. Now, of course, meanwhile, off in Asia, kings were still appealing to authority through the gods as established by tradition and belief. But the Greeks, what will happen now are talking about, of course, the conversation, the art of convincing one another. The politicians had to convince the populace to support them. They had to figure out creative ways of persuasion. Eventually, public debate became a fixture of everyday political life. Of course, this means that public speakers need to learn strategies to convince their audiences. And so here we go. Soon the Greek population increased to the point, next image, where the land no longer sustained them. No, no. But because of their already outward looking view of the world and because of their geography and trade relations, they did not have difficulty with the idea of sending colonists out from their city states to establish new Greek centers throughout the Mediterranean Sea. Those landless who joined the colonists were provided equal lots of land in new colonies, allowing for open competition in the new cities. Market competition came about right here. As for the teachers and the intellectual set, while in Asia they were often made advisors for kings over the upper class, they were made as tutors for their children. Amongst the Greeks, these teachers, these intellects, were also allowed to do various vocations. They can be amongst the people. They're not thrown to the elites. They can have conversations in the marketplace. They can go down the street and talk with their neighbors. They're part of society. And so this changes things too, right? So those who are well learned are not in the ivory tower. They're mixed with everybody else. So wisdom was hence for everybody. Yet, what many scholars neglect to mention is the fact that while all of these ideas give birth to philosophy and were nurtured by the Greeks, they came to fruition actually not in mainland Greece at all. Next image. Uh, no, actually, philosophy grew up not in mainland Greece, not in the realm of isolation. It grew amongst the Greeks of the colonies, specifically the area of Asia Minor that you see here. Now, so why here? Why in this location did philosophy come about? Why in Asia Minor and not in the Greek mainland? There are other factors at work here as well. So rather than the divisive mountains dividing various cities and city states, right, in mainland Greece, Anatolia, called Asia Minor by the Greeks, called Turkey today, has a series of east-western flowing rivers. So rivers flowing from the east and exiting out in the west, forming these great river valleys. And of course, that then unites this unites Anatolia. It puts it all together. You got these, so you have the east-west aspect of these rivers, well, actually going east to west. But you also, beyond these rivers, you have the Anatolian Plateau, which is flat, right? So this naturally geographically allows for communication. Well, where does current day Turkey, what is it connected to? Well, it's connected to the Middle East. The Middle East is connected to where? Of course, it goes into Syria and into what is now Iraq and into what is now Iran and Afghanistan, Bactria, and goes all the way to what is now Pakistan, right? And India, which is, of course, yeah. So the trade routes go right all the way from India, and it goes right all the way to the shore of the Aegean Sea or the Mediterranean. So this is only natural, right? Yeah, it makes sense. Next image. So we're at our first philosopher. His name is Thales. According to many Greek and Romans, along with many scholars today, Thales was not only a Greek philosopher, but also the founder of Greek science, mathematics, and philosophy. For the Greeks, Thales invented deductive mathematics and the famous Thales theorem, excuse me. Um, there was a famous British philosopher by the name of Bertrand Russell, who was basically a polymath himself, mathematician, logician, historian, social critic, and he declared that Western philosophy began with Thales. Thales was known for his incredible wisdom And as Plato testifies, he's one of the seven sages. Well, this is quite a testimony, as Thales was actually self-taught and not following any particular teacher before him. Next image. But where is he at? Well, he is at Miletus. This is Miletus. See it right there? Miletus, of course, is on the shore of Asia Minor, what is now Turkey. And you can see there are roads going everywhere. Those roads um, go all the way to the ancient East and eventually all the way to uh, the Persia and into India. There it is right there. It's interesting to note Miletus, uh, great port town, but so Thales comes from here. The next major pre-Socratic philosopher um, actually is from Miletus, and the next one we'll talk about after that is from Miletus. We got three in a row. All right. So we think to ourselves, wait a second. We have Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes are all from Miletus. And where's the next one from? The next big one. Well, the next big one is from Samos. You can see that up above, and that's Pythagoras. Oh, that's not too far away. Yeah. Where's the next one from? Oh, the next one? Oh, that's Heraclitus from Ephesus. Oh, well, that's up there too, right? Yeah. So they're all connected to each other. They're all close. So Greek philosophy comes about all within the small spans of less than 100 miles. So it is absolutely a geographical notion. Okay, so next image. This is my picture. There I am at Miletus. Obviously, it didn't look that nice at the time of the six into the 500s. But I wanted to kind of show off its great theater. Next image. But it's beautiful. If you ever have a chance to visit, please do. I've been there three times, and I love it every time. Okay, so let's look at me for a little bit. So what will happen here is, although unfortunately not everybody considered considered Thales a true philosopher, our very own Diogenes Laertius, he's the guy over the third century. He doesn't really consider him as a proper philosopher. He does acknowledge that he first established a school at Miletus with Anaximander following him, who he does consider a true philosopher. But as for his earlier origins, some were saying that he was originally from the northern Levantine coast, while others say that he was a native of Miletus. No matter what, they seem to agree that even though whether he's from the Levantine coast uh, or whether he is a native of Miletus, he is still has a mixed background. They seem to agree that he still is partly Phoenician, and so that his so there you have it. He's the son of Ismaeus and Cleomolina, right? Which are, so one very Phoenician name. So he is a mixed background, and that could be a part of it, part of how he may be connecting to earlier ideas coming from the East, so to speak. Now, while as noted by Diogenes Laertius, some authorities say that uh, that that he married and had a son, but the dominant tradition is that he remained unmarried, and he actually adopted his sister's son. And then when he was asked why he had no children of his own, he replied, "Oh, the reason why I don't have children of my own is because I love children." And he didn't want to get to the point of not loving children. He's not, well, but he did possibly raise his sister's son. In fact, it appears that Thales realized that the married life was not for him, nor having lots of children, apparently. In fact, Diogenes Laertius records that when his mother tried to force him to marry, he replied it was too soon. And when she pressed him again later on in life, he replied it was too late. So clearly not for him. At first, Thales was involved in the politics of Miletus during this period. Thales was credited with having given excellent advice on various political matters. He did retire from it. Eventually, he did come back a few times for some advice. For instance, when Croesus, who is the richest uh, person in the entire world, king of Lydia, sent to Miletus an offering of terms of an alliance. He frustrated that plan, which was actually a good idea because eventually Croesus is going to find the kingdom of Lydia conquered by Persia in 546 BCE. So that's a good idea. Thales, interestingly enough, he actually lived, yes, he actually lived with the tyrant of Miletus. Again, now we understand what a tyranny is because I defined it. So it doesn't mean he's necessarily a really bad person, you know. It just means that his background is not so nicely affluent. In fact, Thales, one reputed letter, because a lot of scholars will disagree with this one, and a lot of scholars will agree. A lot of scholars will say, you know what, I like the way this letter feels. So Thales actually wrote Solon of Athens, according to read it to you. Once it refers to the tyranny form of government at Miletus, which of course Thales did not mind, but he knew that Solon, the great wise man of Athens, might. He says, if you leave Athens, it seems to me that you could most conveniently set up your abode in Miletus, which is an Athenian colony, for there you incur no risk, because Solon found himself oftentimes in trouble. If you are vexed at the thought that we are governed by a tyrant, hating as you do all absolute rulers, you would at least enjoy the society of your friends. Bias wrote inviting you to Prini, and if you prefer the town of Prini for residence, I myself will come and live with you, unquote. So there you have that. It's like, hey, come on by. I'm living with the tyrant. He goes against your entire political view, but he's a good guy. Well, he's kind of a good guy. I don't know, really, because there is a story I shouldn't even tell you that one time a messenger went to this tyrant by the name of uh, Thrasybulus, and Thrasybulus was asked by the messenger, "Hey, can you tell me how one should rule?" And so he says, "Oh, okay, sure. Why don't you come out to this field?" And they go out to a wheat field, and as they're going through the wheat field, this tyrant, what he does is he starts to pick off the tallest ears of wheat, and he tears that off, the most fertile ones. He tears it off, and it's like, wait, he just seems to be destroying the best of the crop. And then he just looked at him and smiled. So basically, it's like, if you're in my position, it's wise to get rid of your competition. It's the messenger's like, thanks. Anyway, but you get the point. So there you have it. Eventually, as I said, knowing the season so well, Thales, because he was so good at connecting with nature. Next image. I think we have some images here uh, that we have to go through, but this guy's really entertaining. Sorry. Um, yeah, there. Hi, Thales. Okay, next image. Yeah, there we go. Knowing the seasons so well and able to predict what will grow best even each year, he became quite wealthy as a result. In fact, Hieronymus of Rhodes in the second book of Scattered Notes. I love the fact that somebody in ancient times wrote a book called Scattered Notes. Maybe that should be my autobiography. What do you think? Anyway, it notes that in order to show how easy it is to grow rich, Thales foreseeing that it would be a good season for olives, rented all the oil mills and thus amassed a fortune. So he figured out this is going to be a great crop. I know what I'm going to do. And he created this monopoly on these on of course of the oil the oil mills, and thus there you have it. Thales was he did contemplate who he was and where he was, and he did realize this is very early. He did realize that he came from a place of privilege. So often people don't articulate that, but he realizes that he has an advantage over others. And he says, first of all, he says that he recognizes the fact that I was born a human being and not an animal. He did love animals, but he realized that humans They have it better, And next he says, I was born male as opposed to female. And in this world, in his world that time, males seem to do well. I recognize the fact that that's an advantage I have. And he also recognized that he's a Greek and not a barbarian. He recognized where he was. This is not a boast. This is not like, hey, I'm so great. It's a recognition of the fact that he comes from a place of privilege, and he's trying to be, in a sense, humble about the fact that, well, other people could gain this advantage. Well, not the animals, but the other two, if it not been for where he was born. So there you have it. Uh, so Thales, he had plenty of money, thanks to his oil mills and other things, and so he had leisure time to travel all about the Eastern Mediterranean. And so what did he do? He headed for Egypt. Next image. There's also strong evidence that he went to Babylon too. So, according from his travels, he was able to compile information relating to both ancient astronomy and geometry, systematically organizing it, and then introduce these ideas to the Greeks. I love the fact he just basically goes on trips. He travels around, and he's going to amass as much knowledge as possible. This reminds me a little bit of Plato. Plato does the same thing. He goes traveling around the world. He knew the Eastern Mediterranean. And then finally, at the age of 40, he starts to teach because now he's learned everything. I believe that travel is important for all of us, don't you think? You learn so much. I've learned so much in my trips and voyages and so forth. And this is exactly what he does. So he's getting his ideas through interacting with various people. Diogenes Laertius asserts that he had no instructor except that he went to Egypt and spent time with the priests there. So he's gaining knowledge from the Egyptian priests. Uh, Hieronymus informs us that he measured the height of the pyramids by the shadow they cast, taking the observation at the hour when our shadow is of the same length as ourselves. That's pretty cool. In fact, he explained the overflow of the Nile as due to the Etesian winds, which, blowing in the contrary direction, drove the water upstream. Also, while in Egypt, Pamphylia states that having, next image, learned geometry from the Egyptians, he was he was the first to inscribe a right angled triangle in a circle. So he was the first to inscribe a right angled triangle in a circle, whereupon he sacrificed an ox. So, if you are working on a mathematical theorem, a mathematical idea, make sure that after you accomplish it, you go ahead and sacrifice that ox. Okay. Anyway, there you have it. We do have, let's take a look at me for a few seconds. We do have a supposed letter. Once again, this is a letter. The reason why I'm bringing it up is because it is important, even if it is pseudo a little bit. It's written to an individual by the name of Pherecydes. Pherecydes, why he is important. Pherecydes of Cyrus, he is the teacher of Pythagoras. So that's why this letter is interesting. He's a fifth century uh, mythographer is the best way to describe him. Uh, he lived in Cyrus, is kind of the middle of the Aegean Sea, and he is said to be the first to relate philosophical ideas in prose rather than poetry. He's very mysterious. There's only fragments of his works. We know his cosmology is defined that there are three major principles. You have Zos, which is life. You have Chthoni, which is earth, and you have Chronos, which is time. Of course, Chronos creates elements and the gods within the earth. Zos defeats the great dragon, Ophion. There's always a dragon, right? And throws him into Oceanus. And then Zos marries Chthoni, or the earth. Much Orphism seems to be connected to this shadowy figure. I'm not sure if we have any images of this or not. Let's see. Yeah, we do. So let's go next image. So I can show you where he's from. There we go. Yeah, there's where he's from. So there you have it. And the next image is where he hung out, his cave. This is his cave that he spent much of his time. So let's go ahead and read this letter because I find it interesting. So so what happens is it goes as follows. So Thales, who's traveling all over the Mediterranean, he says to Pherecydes, he says, "I hear that you intend to be the first Ionian to expound theology to the Greeks." And of course, he does, in a sense, connect to Pythagoras, and that does have a lot of impact on the Greeks. And perhaps it was a wise decision to make the book common property without taking advice, instead of entrusting it to any particular persons whatsoever, a course which has no advantages. So he made his writings available to all. However, if it would give you any pleasure, I am quite willing to discuss the subject of your book with you, and if you bid me come to Syros, I will do so. For surely Solon of Athens and I would scarcely be sane if after having sailed to Crete to pursue our inquiries there, and to Egypt to confer with the priests and astronomers, we hesitate to come to you. The reason why I think this is interesting is we know that Solon did go to Egypt, and this letter reputedly is saying that Thales went with Solon to Egypt. Of course, when Solon was in Egypt, he's with the priests. This is, of course, where he sees, here's the story of Atlantis, right? So maybe Thales supposedly maybe was there like listening, nodding, or one way or the other, right? He says, we hesitate to come to you, for Solon too will come with your permission. You, however, are so fond of home that you seldom visit Ionia and have no longing to see strangers. But as I hope, apply yourself to one thing. You namely writing, while we, who never write anything, travel all over Hellas and Asia. It's like very you spend your whole time writing. We travel. You write. I'm not sure if that is a compliment or that's just not very nice, rubbing it in, but there you have it. Okay, next image. So what happens is in mathematics, Proclus tells us that Thales introduced to the Greeks the idea that pairs of vertical angles formed by two intersecting lines are equal. According to Proclus, he also says that Thales introduces the idea that a circle is bisected by a diameter. Also, that base angles of an isosceles triangle are equal. So all these ideas are coming about. When it came to his knowledge of the stars, Thales formally created a school of Greek astronomy at Miletus. He was the first to determine the sun's course from solstice to solstice. He is said to have discovered the seasons of the year and divided it up into 365 days, maybe. This is what Laertius says in the 3rd century CE. He also asserts that Thales' known writings were focused upon the movements of the sun. So there you have it. But he says, according to others, he wrote nothing but two treatises, one on the solstice and the other on the equinox, and so forth. In general, of course, you see this is his idea of what the universe looks like, how it is to be understood. And of course, he's looking at the ecliptic plane here. So let's look at me for a second because a great moment's about to happen. A great moment that affects us today. I mean, we think about these individuals, we say, well, yeah, but how does this affect me? Okay. In general, Dale sought to naturalize supernatural explanations. He looked for natural causes for things rather than settling for supernatural explanations. This realization was truly the beginning of scientific methodology. One of the most important dates in the history of the development of humanity and naturally in the history of philosophy as well as science, mark this down, is May 28th, 585 BCE. May 28th, 585 BCE. I kind of thought years ago that this should be declared as Science Day. There should be like celebrations on this day, May 28th. I mean, for the kids, school's out, but day where everybody, have science conventions and everything else. Why? What happened on that date? Thales on that date was able to exactly predict a solar eclipse. This knowledge, of course, does indeed reveal the fact that he must have had access to Babylonian records because they were able to figure this out. But there's something different about this. But others had figured this out beforehand. So why is it such a big deal that he predicted the solar eclipse when others previously to him did the same thing? Here it is. Rather than give credit to the gods, people will say, hey, Thales, wow, the gods told you the solar eclipse is going to happen. You must be really close to the gods. This is amazing. And gain, of course, a lot of credit that way. Yeah, because this is what the priests of Babylon would do. That's what I'm saying. They would say, hey, it's because we're close to the gods. Or conversely, they'll go, hey, Thales, you caused this eclipse to happen. You must have these great powers. Once again, the priests of Mesopotamia and many different places will claim the credit that they caused it. It's either the gods or them. He didn't answer that way. What did he answer? This is the big moment in history. Rather give credit to the gods or to use this knowledge as a means to gain power via a supernatural sign. Thales explained that this was simply a natural phenomenon, that it was something that connected to the laws of natural science, and others could learn how to predict these kinds of events too. He said, hey, I figured this out through mathematical deduction. I learned this through looking at the natural world and seeing how everything is so perfectly balanced. And guess what? I'm going to give you the power too. I'm going to teach you how to do it. This knowledge is not to be reserved just for the elite. It's for everyone. That, my friends, is a big moment because in other places all around the world, that's not happening. From China to India, these other places, Mesoamerica, think about it. This is different. This is unique because this is moving into a secular world view at this moment. And this is a victory that the Greeks can claim. Not coming up with the idea of being able to predict it. That was people did this all the time before. But his attitude toward it changed the history of humanity. And that's why this date, remember, mark it down, right? That's why this date, May 28th, 585 BCE, that's why it's important historically and for you today, because this is where our world today starts to come about, starts to unfold. In his day, the world was still not understood as round. Okay, so he did see it as kind of this flat disk floating infinite ocean. I mean, we're still there. As for the primary substance of life and of nature, he said that there is a first principle, arche, arche. That's, of course, alpha, rho, chi, epsilon, right? Arche, I actually ate it. So what happens there is arche. You're going, well, so what? It's called first principle. It's the first principle. What's the first principle? For him, it's water. By the way, just for fun, we'll go into this later on. The Gospel of John starts with in arche. And we say in the beginning. You're going to reevaluate that word in a few moments. This is going to change your mind, even how you read the prologue to the Gospel of John. Here we go. We'll keep on going. But Diogenes Laertius adds that here, while considering the essential element for life as all water, Thales did consider a spiritual aspect to his scientific theory. His doctrine was that water is the universal primary substance and that the world is animate and full of divinities. In fact, Aristotle and Hippias, continues Laertius, affirm that arguing from the magnet and from amber, he attributed a soul or life to even inanimate objects. He still had aspects of pantheism, which we see very much within the beliefs of those in Asia Minor. So it's not complete, right? Once a person asked him whether a man could hide an evil deed from the gods. No, he replied, nor yet an evil thought. Another time, when asked, what is the divine? He responded, that which has neither a beginning nor an end. From what we know, Thales was the first person to actually study a natural phenomena known as electricity. You see, he observed when amber was rubbed, it attracted threads of fiber to it. So, in essence, he studied static electricity, right? Later, the negative particle of the atom was named an electron because it was named after the Greek word for amber. What's the Greek word for amber? Electron. You didn't know, did you, right? Thales was considered very wise. One day, someone asked him, what man is happy? Thales responded, he who has a healthy body, a resourceful mind, and a docile nature. Told you he's a good guy, right? Thales told those who listen to truly treasure and remember friends, he says, whether present or absent, for they were to be treasured more than any material objects, unquote. In fact, Thales asserted we are to realize that true beauty was within and not in the outer flesh. He told his followers not to pride ourselves upon outward appearance, but to study to be beautiful in character. Unquote. If one gains what they did not deserve, it was worth little, for one was to shun ill-gotten gains. Thales further warned against words said simply to fill in the conversation and gossip. He didn't just want people just to yap. Let not idle words prejudice you against those who have shared thy confidence. Furthermore, however you treat your parents, you should expect the same from your kids. Whatever provisions thou hast made for your parents, the same must be expected from your children. When asked, how shall we lead the best and most righteous life? He returned by refraining from doing what we blame in others. Being asked what is difficult, he replied, to know oneself. While Thales attempted his best to naturalize supernatural explanations, he was still a man of his times. And while his mind was always focused on the theoretical, often he did so without considering pragmatic applications. Let's go to the next image. So he was very much focused upon science, right? So, this is a little bit on the eclipse. That's a great image. That's great. Next image, you can see the time and everything else. This is his view of the world. You can see it is a three-story universe with a dome of heaven above, the earth and below, but it is a sphere. You see that? It is circular. It's a flat earth, sort of. It's kind of a compromise, right? You can see that. And so what will happen is that the canopy of the skies, what happens is that when it changes through the seasons, it's the canopy around that turns back and forth. So, or I should say that either that turns or the earth turns, the flat part turns, whatever. So next one, next image. It's a great image. Oh, yeah. This is an ancient image of Thales. Okay, so basically it says Thales there on the left. This is from a bathhouse that was located in Ostia in Rome. Sorry, south of Rome. Uh, it's a port city for Rome. Please, you can see above there it says Durham, Cacatus, Monet, Ut, Nitunt, Thales. What it says, you got to watch out for Roman graffiti. Uh, Basically, it says Thales warned those who go number two hard to shine. I bleeped out the word. So there you have it. Yeah, I gotta love it. Next image. Sorry. Okay. Oh, here it is. Okay. So what happens is he was very much into the theoretical, but he did so without considering pragmatic applications. In a sense, under the model of scientific methodology, Thales perfected the hypothesis, but did not perfect the experiment to prove his hypothesis. One story told how Thales fell into a well while pondering the heavens. A passing peasant is said to have fished him out with a comment, "Here is a man who would study the stars and cannot see what lies at his feet." That would be me, right? And maybe many of you listening, right? Our minds are in the stars, and what happens? I fall into a well or trip over my own shoelaces. But there you have it. There's another version of it by Diogenes Laertius. It runs as follows. It is said that once, when he was taken out of doors by an old woman in order that he might observe the stars, he fell into a ditch, and his cry for help drew from the old woman the retort, "How can you expect to know all about the heavens, Thales, when you cannot even see what is just before your feet?" You can hear that too, right? Now, of course, people take this story, which is a fun story, and they'll make it into something else. You always get those people. Letters supposedly written by Anaximenes of Miletus to Pythagoras said that Thales' fall into the well actually killed him. Uh, it did not kill him. He was not killed by falling. What happened really is, how did Thales die? He died of a heat stroke while watching a gymnastic contest. He was watching Miletus are all into sports, and he was just out there in the sun too long. And he had a heat stroke, and that was the end of him at the ripe old age of 78. So he did live a good life. Well, uh, after him, you have, of course, the next image. Let's look at this. You had the great kingdom of Lydia, which is contemporaneous to his time. King Croesus was the great king of Lydia. Either him or most likely his predecessor or the one before him are the ones who invented something known as coinage. You can complete with the heads and the tails. Well, what happened is the Persians start to expand. They start to press against the border of Lydia in Cappadocia and in Cilicia. You can see that to the right. And it's clear that the Persians are a threat. King Croesus, the richest man in the world, uh, decided to send a message to the Oracle of Delphi to ask what to do about the Persians at his front door. And the Oracle says as follows: if you attack, a great empire will fall. He's all, yay! So he attacks, and a great empire does fall, his own. And so the Persians take over Asia Minor, and they take over these coastal areas along the coastal city states of the Greeks, these settlements. They take over these settlements. And you're thinking, well, that is probably a bad thing. Well, it's bad, but it's also good. Next image. Oh, this is King Croesus thinking that life is going to be great. He considered himself the happiest man in the world. In fact, when Solon came to visit him, Solon did something pretty funny. Solon, he was, of course, the head of Athens, and he tried to create this sort of democracy, kind of a sliding oligarchy, but he tries to put together a constitution.
for the Athenians. And he knows that the Athenians are always changing their minds. But he says, okay, do you agree to this constitution? Yes. Now you got to make one more agreement, and that is if you that if you want to change it, I have to be there for it. And they all, yeah, I will agree to that. And then he leaves for 10 years. I guess it takes 10 years for these ideas to settle. He thought, I'm going to get away. And this is when goes around. Maybe he was hanging out with Thales. Maybe he's going with him to Egypt or maybe even Babylon. Who knows? We know that Solon is traveling around. And Solon comes to Croesus before anything is going to happen to him. And Croesus says, hey, who's the happiest man in the world? And he's expecting Solon to say, you are, Croesus, because of your great hospitality. And what happens is Solon says, I don't know. You know, um, I think it's this guy that I know named Tellus. And Croesus is like, what? Tellus? Who's that? Of course, you're wondering, tell us about it. So he's a tell us. Yeah, he was a great guy. He he was proud of his city, and his city did well, and he was a great citizen, so that made him happy. Um, he he had kids, he had sons, and they in turn had sons, and they all lived. Nobody died in childbirth, and so he was happy about that. And yeah, and and he died. He had a glorious death, which means he died in battle. And that's what Solon says. And Croesus is like, okay, I don't want that. Well, guess what? Um, he goes to the Oracle Del. He sends a message to the Oracle Delphi, and well, he does fight the Persians. They lose. And that means that the centers of what will be Greek philosophy will be under the Persians. Why is that important? Next image. Here's the Persian Empire. Do you see something? Uh-huh. Persian Empire, it unifies, all goes all the way. Of course, you see it crosses over into continental Europe. You can see there's Lydia, that's, Miletus and Ephesus and Samos. These are the places where the birthplace of philosophy, except with the exception of Thales, some of the pre-Socratic philosophers, actually many of them, except the ones in Italy, are growing up under Persian rule. But take a look at this. Persia goes all the way to India. Oh, okay. Which means that ideas of the Greeks will travel east, and ideas of India and Persia will travel west. And so this greatly expands philosophy during this axial age, right? This is 500 BCE. So at this time, right, already you have Buddha of Buddhism, Mahavira of Jainism. You have, of course, the Hindu Shrammanas who rejected connected the Upanishads, who rejected the Brahmanism. Of course, off in China, you already had the life of Confucius that century, and Lao Tzu with Taoism, right? Zoroastrianism starts to expand because Zoroastrianism becomes eventually the official religion of the Persian Empire. And so, yeah, so Greek philosophy, and of course, you have also post-Babylonian captivity Judaism there too, right? With the idea of individual relationship with God, with Yahweh, with El, right? As opposed to a collective priestly one. So these are huge ideas, and it's fluid. And of course, Aramaic becomes the international language. This is great. So we're going to see mixed ideas that are important for the rest of our conversation tonight. Let's go to the next image. Plus, you got this road. It's called the Royal Road. You see here, 1,700 miles from Susa to Sardis by going through Arbela near Nineveh. Stations with fresh horses every 15 miles. Took 7 days to travel with a letter from Susa, you see right there on the right, all the way to Sardis on the left. The reality is that soon, right after that, it will expand the Royal Road, which is paved, by the way, and it will expand all the way to Ephesus. And get this, the road from Susa will expand eventually to Persepolis, and another part of the road will go all the way to the Indus. And so, if you want to send a message, for example, from Ephesus to Susa, there's 111 postal stations set, and you're going to get that, yeah, in 7 days. You can send a message like Pony Express. You can send a message all the way to India, and it'll take about 3 weeks. Wow, you see how fluid the world's a lot smaller now, thanks to the Persians. And well, those pre-Socratic philosophers are now there, which means their ideas are going to be traveling east and so forth. Next image. I just thought you may want to see. Oh, there's a remnant of the Royal Highway. It was paved. They had something like the Highway Patrol that took care of it, maintained it all the time. And they also had kind of caravanserai along the way, a place for you to rest your animals. There's like hotels. You go inside these gates, you put the animals, in front of where you're going to be staying for that night, and they close the big gates and you're safe. Persians are pretty amazing, right? Okay, there. And of course, there are auditors who come in the night, can sneak along these roads, and you never know catch those who are very satraps, governors unawares. So there you have it. Next image. So Persians, right? So we go from here, and so Anaximander comes next, a Miletus, right? 611 to 547. He is now under the Persian Empire. This is an early image of him. Let's go to the next image. There we have. You can see his name written there right on top. Anaximander was a Greek philosopher. He was also from Miletus, the same place where Thales is from. He was a pupil, actually, of Thales, and sought to create the first detailed explanation of all of nature as a universal system. To Diogenes Laertius, Anaximander was more a true philosopher than Thales, and gave both he and Pythagoras credit for starting this widespread philosophical trend across the Greek Mediterranean world. And of course, he says, but philosophy, the pursuit of wisdom, has had a twofold origin. It started with Anaximander on the one hand and Pythagoras on the other. And the former was a pupil of Thales. Pythagoras was taught by Pherecydes. The one school was called Ionian because Thales and Milesian was a Milesian and therefore an Ionian, instructed Anaximander. And the other school was called Italian for Pythagoras, who worked for the most part in Italy. And the one school, that of Ionia, terminates with Clitomachus and Chrysippus and Theophrastus, that of Italy with Epicurus, of course, Epicurean ideas. This is pretty huge. So, but Thales, he rejects the belief that everything originated from the element of water. He says, no, I don't think so. So what he thinks is that the universe was too diversified and needed to originate from something less differentiated than water. As Diogenes Laertius states, he laid down as his principle and element that which is unlimited without defining it as air or water or anything else. He held that parts undergo change, but the whole is unchangeable. So there you have that. Let's look at me for a few moments. He comes up with something. Now you understood the Persian Road. We're going to go somewhere in a few seconds. We're going to travel around. So I want to make sure that you kind of are following me on this. So here we go. Give me a second here. I'm going to put this together here. Okay. Anaximander believed that the universe was infinite, using the Greek word apeiron, Apeiron, right? So you have apeiron, which means unlimited. The universe is unlimited. It is infinite. It's indefinite, right? He also redefined the word arche, which you do see in the Gospel of John, which up to that time simply meant the beginning of something, to have a specific cosmological association, making it into a source that could perpetually give birth to whatever will be, perpetually moving, constantly in motion. And this was a first principle. This idea 100% goes into Philo and 100% goes into the Greek of the prologue of the Gospel of John, right? Is this interesting? The beginning is perpetually, as in the spring, as in the well, always creating, always moving. And of course, eventually it'll be attributed to the Logos, which will be Heraclitus of Ephesus will bring that up. This is interesting. You're getting these ideas. Anaximander asserted that this primary source, the boundless or indefinite apeiron, has always existed. It filled all space, and by its constant motion, separated opposites outside from itself, hot and cold, moist and dry. Uh, Next image. These opposites interact by encroaching on one another and thus repay one another's injustice. You can see here, this universe right here, the cylinder through the air. These opposites interact. The ultimate result is a plurality of worlds that successfully decay and return to the indefinite. The notion of the indefinite and its processes prefigure the later conception of the indestructibility of matter. As a result, the universe originated as a result of the separation of opposites in the primordial matter. And of course, as you see this great image of Anaximander's universe with the sun there, there's holes through which we see surrounding wheels of the sun, the moon, and the stars. Earth is within a cylinder made up of fire and air, moon. So it's pretty interesting. Now, next image. We're going someplace. You're like, wait, what did you just do, Dr. Rietveld? This looks like what? Nerva culpa? Somni? What this is meditative absorption without distinctions, where the knower, knowing, known become one from near without, vikalpa, distinction, modification, thought construction, samadhi, absorption, integration. What is this all about, Dr. Rietveld? You're asking me. Guess what? Uh, Anaximander's apeiron correlates very directly with the contemporaneous idea, the Hindu concept known as nirvikalpa, which means never alternative, which is a Sanskrit adjective used in the general sense of not admitting an alternative and associated with the idea known as aditi, which is that which is limitless as the primary cause. Exactly what he is saying. Wow, right? eYnAurrLTY0 notes in his Hinduism and Buddhism, he says, in dealing with pre-Socratic thought, we constantly find ourselves in an atmosphere more akin to that of the East and that of the West. As the late Professor F.H. Smith pointed out, the apeiron of Anaximander is almost exactly the Hindu Nirvikalpa, the nameless and the formless, called Aditi, the unlimited, in the Rig Veda. Moreover, this Aditi, which is Nirvikalpa, is ordered by the immanent Rita or Dharma, which means Dharma means the cosmic order in this case. Just as in Anaximander, an immanent decay or righteousness ensures that all things shall eventually return to the apeiron whence they come. In fact, the word dharma can also mean righteousness. It says, from which all things take their rise, and by necessity they are destroyed into these. For all things render just as atonement to one another for their injustice according to the due ordering of time. The Hindu concept of Rita, the law of nature or course of things, has the same scope as the Greek decay or justice. Yeah, right? So you're seeing the flow of ideas. These ideas are going west, they're going east, they're going back and forth. Okay, next image. I thought that was pretty fun. Okay, for Anaximander, the world was most assuredly round or circular. He even made a model of the Earth. He was the first to draw on a map the outline of land and sea, according to Diogenes Laertius. But Diogenes Laertius says, quote, that he constructed a globe as well. And so scholars are fighting back and forth of whether this is a correct image or if it is a full circle. Now, we do know very soon the pre-Socratics will have the full globular sphere of the earth, but this is where people are at. Some ancient writers seem to have this model. Others will say it's a it's a full sphere. But still, this earth, according to Anaximander, was located in the center of the universe, proposing what is called a geocentric universe. This idea starts with him in a big way and will continue all the way to, of course, to the time of the Renaissance, right? Which would go to a heliocentric universe where the Earth goes around the sun. He states that the Earth, which is of spherical shape, lies in the midst, occupying the place of a center, that the moon, shining with borrowed light, derives its illumination from the sun. Further, that the sun is as large as the earth and consists of the purest fire, unquote. Well, he was right about the moon, right? We got a little sun, but hey, we're getting there, right? So it is borrowed light. He does say that it is the sun that gives the light to the moon. So we're getting there. Anaximander proposed that there were multiple worlds that appeared, thrived, and then died. Some worlds even perished while others were born. He said, for without movement, there can be no generation and no destruction. Um, as for thunder and lightning, he says that they were natural, not supernatural phenomena, with thunder resulting when clouds hit together. And the louder it was, the bigger the shock of impact. Yet he said that both were connected to the air and how much pressure there was in connection to the hitting of the clouds. More importantly, next image. Oh, did I not have that next image here? Next image. Let's see. Next image. Okay, go back. I guess that picture got lost. It's okay. Go back one more, and then we'll take this one down. This is the next philosopher, but we're almost there. I had a chart. Sometimes the pictures show. Don't worry. So most importantly, so yeah, take it down. Yeah, just take it down. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Most importantly, Anaximander asserted that life on Earth evolved from moisture. You are now in for a treat now that you lasted this long, right? He says that humans were once fish and kept developing until they emerged from the sea. And then humans, quote, achieved his physical state by adaptation to the environment. Have you heard this before? Of course, this is very much goes into the theory of evolution. Much of this theory was based upon his own personal observation of the fossil record, noting that these fossils revealed that animals emerged out of the sea a long time ago. And so, therefore, humans must have followed the same process, he said by deduction. He stated that the earth was once very humid, with much of it covered by water, because he observed that around Miletus, the water level had descended, and it did. But as the humanity evaporated, dry land eventually emerged, forcing both animals and humans to adapt. Humans eventually lost their scales due to adapting to the new environment. So there you have it. Of course, you always get somebody that misunderstands. I love this. I'm going to give you somebody who misunderstands his theories. This is a third century CE grammarian by the name of Censorinus. I love it. Censorinus. It sounds like censoring things, right? And he's a grammarian. So maybe he should have a name like Censorinus. He states that Anaximander of Miletus considered that from warmed up water and earth emerged either fish or entirely fish-like animals. Inside these animals, men took form and embryos were held prisoners until puberty. Only then, after these animals burst open, could men and women come out, now able to feed themselves. It's like, you always get those students who are kind of like half listening in the back of the room, kind of go, I think I got this. I think I can repeat this. And it comes out like, what in the world? Does this make any sense? It's like, yeah, well, that's the reality. Anaximander said that there was no possible way humans could survive the formation of the world and its hostile conditions in the form he is now, and so had to have adapted from an earlier form and gradually adjusted over a period of time as the environment changed. He also noted that the world would continue to become a drier place, with the world continually heating up, and until eventually everything will be all dried up. Well, thank you for your positive spirit, Anaximander, but I'd say that this is pretty much a remarkable kind of person. What do you think? He's coming up with some ideas just by his observation, just by looking around. As far as Anaximander's personal life was concerned, let's do a little dot on him. Diogenes Laertius states there's a story that the boys laughed at his singing, and that when he heard it, he rejoined, then to please the boys, I must even improve my singing all the more. So basically, he's going to just singing louder. Anaximander was very interested in making many devices to mark time. In fact, he was, according to the ancient authors, many of them, that he was the inventor of the genome. Basically, this is the marker for the sundial, and he set this up at Lacedaemon. This is also mentioned by Favoronius in his miscellaneous history in order to mark the solstices and equinoxes. He also constructed clocks to tell the time, so he's good at timekeeping. Now, the reality is that when it comes to the sundial, the Chinese had this as early as the second millennium BCE. It did go to Babylon eventually, and it did reach um, the coast because, hey, hello, now that you have that Persian Royal Road, all of these inventions on the ideas are just passing very quickly from east to west. So, yeah, so for him and for the Greek world, he does the sundial. Okay, let's go to the next one. Thank you, Margie, for doing all this. Sorry about those. Okay, it's Anaximenes, 585 to 528. This will be the most brief talk on him. Basically, he is from Miletus. Again, a third of the road because this is the center of philosophy. This is where, the Royal Road stops at Sardis, now Ephesus, and all these ideas are coming along, and he's receiving them. Next image. Anaximenes did commit to a central element as a building block for all things. He took for his first principle air, or that which is unlimited. His reasoning applied to the theory of what he called um, rarefaction, which basically was the reduction of materials' density, the opposite of compression and condensation. He believed when air compressed, it became visible, forming mist and then water. Basically, backward engineering this idea from the fact that when water evaporates, it appears to become air, or when it's heated up, becomes steam. He's just kind of going the other direction. He proposed that the air became too cold, it would actually become rocks. Okay. He surmised that earthquakes resulted when the earth became too dry and lost moisture, or conversely, when there was too much water. Something related to liquid caused the earth to move, he believed. Next image. He believed the world was a thin disk floating on air. A lot of people didn't, were upset by the fact of this construction. They wanted to have the idea that the gods were in charge. Meanwhile, rainbows are created as light shines through condensed air, mist, much like how the moon reflects sunlight, and so light is refracted to form different colors. Next image. He also held that the world could be understood by studying the laws of nature. And so, again, like the other two previous ones. As for the soul, he says it was also composed of air. As he states, he says, as our souls being air, holds us together and controls us, so does wind or breath and air enclose the whole world. He does something. He says the soul is connected to the physical world, to breath, to air. And so he believed that our soul is something that fit not within the supposedly in the spiritual world, but he saw this as connected to the material world. So fascinating. Next image. We got Pythagoras here. Now, while Pythagoras was a noted pre Socratic Greek philosopher, we must keep in mind that he was also very much a mystic too, and so represents the realm between science and religion. Next image. Pythagoras was born on the island of Samos off the coast of the Ionian area, directly across from the city of Ephesus. You can see there, you see Melite there in the bottom, Samos, Ephesus. Everybody's close together. According to Diogenes Laertius, Pythagoras was the son of the gem engraver by the name of Mensarchus. And according to Hemippus, a Samian, also says the same. Pythagoras had to have some means, for he was able to travel. In fact, he left Samos for Lesbos, and then he went on to, of course, like they all do, he went off to Egypt because this is just, again, it's interesting that travel is always such an important component to all of this. So let's go to the next image. According to, so what happens is Pythagoras uh, from Samos, this is what he writes, Diogenes writes, from Samos he went, it is said, to Lesbos with an introduction to Pherecydes from his uncle Zolius. He had 3 silver flagons made and took them as presents to each of the priests of Egypt. He had brothers, of whom Eunomius was the elder and Tyrenius was the second. Apparently, after, oh, by the way, his slave by the name Zamlochus was actually worshipped because some people believe that he was actually the god Kronos in human form. Apparently, after his first round of travels, Pythagoras returned to Samos temporarily, and he was so. Let's see. Go to the next image. Oh yeah, returned to Samos temporarily. Let's just look at me for a little bit. Yeah, that'd be good. Returned to Samos temporarily. He was a pupil, as already stated, by Pherecydes of Syros, after whose death he went on to Samos to be the pupil of Hermodamus. Now, Pythagoras was eager for knowledge, but not just any knowledge, but mystical and occult knowledge. Diogenes Laertius states that while still young, so eager was he for knowledge, he left his own country and had himself initiated into all the mysteries and rites, not only of Greece, but also of foreign countries. Most likely during this time, Pythagoras was introduced to the Orphic mysteries, which would so influence him later on in life. 3 of his exotic destinations were Egypt, Babylon, and Crete. Now, he was in Egypt when Polycrates sent him a letter of introduction to Amasis. He learned that the Egyptian language, he learned Egyptian language, and then he journeyed, according to this primary account, amongst the Chaldeans and the Magi. Then, while in Crete, now the next image, now in Crete, he went down into the caves of Ida. He also entered the Egyptian sanctuaries and was told their secret lore concerning their gods. This is an image here of Mount Ida that he went to for initiation. In fact, the next image that we see, go to the next one, is the sacred cave in which many would receive their visions and ideas and beliefs and epiphanies and so forth. This is the cave from where Zeus was being taken care of. Next image. And then he went back to Samos. In fact, I'm going to show you this. There is a supposed cave where Pythagoras lived in Samos. So let's take a look at this cave. It's a popular cave. I can see he's trying to get away from people. And so this is the cave that you can visit. Let's go to the next one. There is, you go into the interior, there's like a little chapel there. Next image, you can see it was used since ancient times. So yeah, um, when Pythagoras finally returned to Samos again, he was upset with what he found. He's upset, and um, so here's a quote. After that, he returned to Samos to find his country, according to Laertius, under the tyranny of Polycrates. So he sailed away to Crotona in Italy, and there he laid down a constitution for the Italian Greeks, and he and his followers were held in great estimation for being nearly 300 in number. So well did they govern that state that its constitution was in effect a true aristocracy. Unquote. Next image. So he travels all the way to Crotona. Next image. And you can see not a lot left of this place, but there you have it. At Crotona, Pythagoras created a community of mystics with secret rites, right? So I'm going to just make sure here. So I'm trying to keep up with the notes here, but also I want to get a drink of water. Uh, one of those things when you're doing talks, it's important to. And I just realized I just drank one out of my three waters. I'm going, I wonder why my mouth is so parched. And I'm taking a look at this beautiful salty ocean, and yeah, that looks good. And when that happens, it's time to have something to drink. I feel a lot better. Sorry, my throat was getting a little sore there. I'm talking nonstop. Here we go. So at Crotona, Pythagoras created a community of mystics with secret rites, and in many ways they're related to the Orphic mysteries. Now, this is going to be important. Those active within the Orphic tradition were fond of Theogonies, Hesiod's grand work in particular. What is also clear is that they enjoyed embellishing these stories of the gods with even stranger elements filled with abstract speculations interwoven throughout with mystical nuances and connotations. Of all these tales, the myth of Dionysus Zagreus is the most important for deciphering a belief system known as Orphism. Now, I want to make this very clear. Pythagoras and Pythagorean ideas will spread Orphism, this Orphic rites and beliefs and perspectives, all over the ancient world, not just in the Eastern Mediterranean, but to the West. It becomes a very important idea, a pivotal idea, and Pythagoras again is connected to it, and it does fundamentally change our understanding of religion on so many different levels. So let's go there. I love Walter Burkert, excuse me. He wrote work on Greek religion. I want to quote him on the mysteries of this theogony connected to the Orphic rites. I'm going to quote him. So here it is. Zeus, according to this story, raped his mother, Rhea Demeter, and sire Persephone. This is not a great beginning, I know. He raped Persephone in the form of a snake and sired Dionysus. To the child Dionysus, he hands over the rule of the world, places him on a throne, and has him guarded by the Corybantes. Who's going to be upset by the fact that he did this? Well, Hera, his wife, I mean, she's there too. But Hera sends the Titans, who distract the child with toys. And while the child is looking into a mirror, he is dragged from the throne, killed and torn to pieces, then boiled and roasted and eaten. Zeus thereupon hurls his thunderbolt to burn the Titans, and from the rising soot there spring men, rebels against the gods who nevertheless participate in the divine. For the remains that were rescued and collected, Dionysus will rise again. So basically, what happens in the over, you know, basically what they're trying to do, these theogonies are never, they're kind of brutal, but the idea that's being communicated is that Dionysus because it's going through Demeter and Persephone. Dionysus is mostly Zeus stuff. He's mostly of spiritual. Okay, he's mostly of the spiritual stuff. Now, what happens is that when the Titans, while they're spiritual, they are connected to the material world. They're dark material like spirituality. They're heavy. They're so these Titans, what they do, very fleshly, what they do is they eat, they consume Dionysus. And when Zeus destroys with his thunderbolt, lightning bolt, excuse me, maybe the thunderbolt too, maybe he shook them with the noise and they with his lightning bolt, when he destroys them, the problem is you got the ash of the Titans, but you also have, let's look at me for a second, the ash of the Titans. Well, actually, let's go to the next image real quick. There it is. We have the ash of the Titans, but we also have the ash of the spiritual Dionysian aspect. So what Zeus does is he puts the Titanic flesh and combines it with the Dionysian spirit, and hence humanity is now born with two parts. We have a Dionysian spirit that belongs to the heavens above, and we have a Titanic material, perhaps even evil nature. And so our soul, our spirit, it is this is covered or surrounded by the tomb, the material tomb of the flesh. And so you have these ideas, right? Let's take this down for a second. So again, in this myth, the human condition is divided between a divine, right? Divided between a divine Dionysian spirit and an evil Titanic flesh. In the Greek world, the repressive Titanic nature of man was proverbial, expressing an innate evil nature that is exhibited by disobedience to authorities, parents, and laws, according to Plato. This evil soma, this evil body, was considered a tomb. Sema of the soul. Interesting. Soma, right, is the body. Sema is the word for the soul, for the tomb. Excuse me. The followers of Orpheus gave the name uh, Sema, especially to the body, because the soul is punished for that which it is to be punished, because it has this covering, this likeness of a prison, in order that it may be kept in custody until it has paid its due. The correlation of Orphism, as constructed here, to Christianity, with its duality between spirit and flesh, inward and divinely inspired goodness within the person, in opposition to an inborn evil or imperfect nature stemming from wicked beings, whether the Titans or Satan and his demons, and an afterlife with rewards and punishments, is obvious and needs no further elaboration. The Orphic belief in the soul as a divine part of the body, as the impure part of man, gave a deeper meaning to asceticism and prohibitions, and often dictated their conduct that conformed to Pythagorean conventions, right? So you have these ideas. Of course, in the Orphic mysteries, you recognize the fact that, yeah, you are of the earth, but you're also of the heavens, of the stars above. You recognize that fact and make sure that when you die, you don't drink from the waters of Lethe, you don't drink from the waters of forgetfulness. You instead go not left but right, head right for that palm, go to that lake of memory, drink of that lake of memory, and you will remember not just your past life, but all your past lives, and then you'll be released from this world. I mean, this is Orphism. This idea is spread by the Pythagoreans. His disciples revered him as a demigod. Let's take a look at an image here. His words, believed, inspired by him. There he goes. Yeah. In some cases, they believed he was even a literal god. Quote, indeed, his bearing is said to have been most dignified, and his disciples held the opinion about him that he was Apollo, come down from the far north. There is a story that once, when he was disrobed, his thigh was seen to be of gold. And when he crossed the river, known as Nessus, quite a number of people said that they heard it welcome him. In fact, so greatly was he admired that his disciples used to be called prophets to declare the voice of God. Besides which, he himself says in a written work that after 207 years in Hades, he has returned to the land of the living. Well, 207 years in Hades, he said. Thus it was that they remained his staunch adherents, and when men came to hear his words from afar, amongst them the Lucanians, the Picatians, and the Romans, they greatly admired him. Again, I'm reading a whole litany of primary sources. Those who were part of his mystic community at Crotona uh, were to ascribe to the belief that they were absolutely equal and were to share all things in common. According to Timaeus, he was the first to say, friends have all things in common, and friendship is equality. Indeed, his disciples did put all their possessions into one common stock. It sounds like early Christianity, does it not? For 5 whole years, they had to keep silent, merely listening to his discourses without seeing him until they passed an examination, and therefore they were admitted to his house and allowed to see him. So, I mean, this is just a whole bunch of different kinds of mysterious stuff going on. They would never use coffins of cypress because the scepter of Zeus was made from it. So there you have it. When Pythagoras arrived in Italy, next image, I think. So I'm not sure. When Pythagoras arrived in Italy, he brought his mother with him. Well, just look at me for a little bit. I still like that image. That's him with his daughters. He brought his mom with him. Diogenes Laertius records. Hermippus gives another anecdote. Pythagoras, on coming to Italy, made a subterranean dwelling and enjoyed on his mother to mark and record all that passed and at what hour, and to send her notes down to him until he should ascend. So basically, you got mom above and son in the house in this underworld that he excavated. That's kind of cool, right? You dig this. You're going downstairs. It's more than just a basement there. So she did so. Pythagoras, sometime afterwards, came up withered and looking like a skeleton, then went into the assembly and declared he had been down to Hades, and even read out his experiences to them. They were so affected that they wept and wailed and looked upon him as divine, going so far as to send their wives to him in hopes that they would learn some of his doctrines. And so they were called Pythagorean women. Now, nothing nefarious was happening there, but it does mean that a large portion of Pythagoreans happen to be women. There's a long story about that. Often there is confusion over what he dictated, what was written down, what he wrote, and what his disciples wrote in his name. There are some who even said that Pythagoras had no writings whatsoever. But we do know that he did write many works. We saw on some, well, that he that many of his works were written down. Thing is that his wife may have done this, but that's a whole other story. Many of his teachings were secret, as noted by Diogenes Laertius, and of course, so you have to be quiet about it. Um, Two of his most famous teachings concern the transmigration of souls, and second, the belief that numbers constitute the true nature of things. Let's go to some images now. I love that. That's of course, an example of what his maybe his community would have looked like at that time. Looks like a good time. Next image. Yeah, this is actually the image of him doing the uh, going into the underworld and coming up. Next image. Well, we'll go there next. Okay. Um, I'll go there in a second. We will talk about this. Well, we can keep that there. I like that anyway, because we'll be mentioning it in a few seconds. Concerning the transmigration of souls. By the way, that's me at the temple of Apollo, of Didyma, which will be mentioned in a few seconds. Concerning the transmigration of souls, also known as reincarnation, yes, Pythagoras not only popularized Orphism, this belief system of this duality of spirit, the material, flesh, and spirit, and so forth. He also really brought about reincarnation, which of course is very extremely Hindu, right? So what happens is as follows. Heraclitus of Pontus tells us that he used to say about himself that he once had been Athalides and was accounted to be Hermes' son, that is Mercury's son. And Hermes told him he might choose any gift he liked except immortality. So he asked to retain through life and through death a memory of his experiences. Hence, in life, he could recall everything, and when he died, he still kept the same memories. Afterwards, in course of time, his soul entered into Euphorbus, and Menelaus then wounded him. Now, Euphorbus used to say that he had once been Athalides and obtained this gift from Hermes. And then he told of the wandering of his soul, how it migrated hither and thither, into how many plants and animals it had come, and all that it underwent in Hades, and all that the other souls there had to endure. And so you have this him telling these stories that yeah, he was not only had previous lives as humans, but he had previous lives as animals and even as plants like trees and so forth, that there's this background. When Euphorbus died, his soul passed on to Hermotimus, and he also, wishing to authenticate the story, went up to the temple of Apollo at Brachydiae, which is this place right here that you're seeing me at the steps, where he identified the shield which Menelaus, on his voyage home from Troy, had dedicated to Apollo. So he said, the shield being now so rotten through and through that the ivory facing was the only thing that was left. So this is that place. Next image, you can see another angle of this place where he looked at the shield. There it is. This is where all the oracles occurred. When Hermotimus died, he became Pyrrhus, a fisherman of Delos, and again he remembered everything. How he was at first Athalides, and then Euphorbus, then Hermotimus, and then Pyrrhus. When Pyrrhus died, he became Pythagoras and still remembered all the facts mentioned. So you have this clear or perceived clear perception that is going on. One more picture because I just can't resist. There it is. So you can see there that it's a beautiful place, and of course, this is just south of Miletus. Next image. Pythagoras was dedicated to telling the truth without compromise as much as possible, with a story told about his experiences in Hades, in between one of his multiple lives that served as a warning to him. Of course, the same authority, as we have seen, asserts that Pythagoras took his doctrines from the Delphic priestess by the name of Thesmotila. So this is a Delphic, of course, a priestess here. Hieronymus, however, says that when he had descended into Hades, he saw the soul of Hesiod bound fast to a brazen pillar and gibbering, and the soul of Homer hung on a tree with serpents writhing about, this being their punishment for what they had said about the gods. He also saw under torture those who would not remain faithful to their wives. So you have these kind of stories there. Next image. Pythagoras taught that humanity is on what was called the wheel of birth, which is virtually identical to the Hindu idea of the wheel of suffering. For what one does in this life, whether good or bad actions, will determine where the soul will go in the next life. Pythagoras asserted that the soul bound now in this creature
Now, when that thus goes on a round ordained of necessity. If one wanted to move on to a better life the next time and eventually be liberated altogether, certain ethical standards needed to be observed. So you have these ideas, next image, you have these ideas that seem to be related to this concept of karma. So Pythagoras believed, as Hindus, he believes that we are born, we live our life, and then we die. And if we are good, we move up. Let's look at me for a few seconds. You move up. So here we go. So if you're born, you live your life, and you're good, then you move up and you become more spiritual. And then, of course, this is rebirth. And then you're born, you live your life, and you're good, and you die, and your rebirth, reincarnation goes further and further up. You become more and more spiritual according to Pythagoras and according to Hindus by doing right action. Eventually, according to Pythagoras and according to Hindus, you are released. Of course, Hindus call this moksha. For Pythagoras, of course, it's combining many will say, the Orphic mysteries, where you decide that you're going to be drinking from the water of memory as opposed to the waters of Lethe, which are the waters of forgetfulness. And so you still have these choices to live. Now, if you are bad, you're born, you live your life, and you die. If you're bad, the bad karma, you move down and down and down and down and down into the material world. And of course, Pythagoras believes this. So it seems to me, of course, this idea is definitely, of course, coming from India, right? Here it is, reincarnation is introduced by Pythagoras. Reincarnation is Empedocles will go into this. Reincarnation is further articulated by Plato, and it's talked about quite. Even reincarnation even gets into Virgil's Aeneid, who authors who work for Augustus. So Greeks and Romans, many believe in reincarnation. This is just the reality. And once again, this is an idea that comes from the east to west, flowing along these routes, these trade routes. And again, I find that to be so important. Are you seeing this, right? So there's a flow of information. For his followers, Pythagoras established certain purification rites to achieve the goal of eventual liberation. These rites included rules for ethical conduct, which is, of course, in Hinduism too, dietary observations, and ascetic disciplines. This, of course, parallels the Indian guru, right? And of course, Diogenes Laertius writes in the 3rd century CE, he says, concerning Pythagoras, purifications is by cleansing, baptism, and lustration, and by keeping clean from all deaths and births and all pollution, and abstaining from meat and flesh of animals that have died, mullets and egg-sprung animals, beans, and other absences prescribed by those who perform mystic rites in the temple. Yet, so there you have it. Yet, the highest goal was to achieve special knowledge that will enable one's soul to transcend this life, which entailed a love of wisdom. Hence, many Greeks believed Pythagoras was the one who first coined the phrase philosophy, which does, of course, indeed mean the love of wisdom in the first place. Pythagoras perceives the makeup of the soul as follows. He says the soul of man, he says, is divided into 3 parts: intelligence, reason, and passion. Other animals possess intelligence and passion as well, but reason by man alone. The seat of the soul extends from the heart to the brain. The part of it which is the heart is passion, while the parts located in the brain are reason and intelligence. The senses are distillations from these. Reason is immortal, all else, he says, are mortal. The soul draws nourishment from the blood. The faculties of the soul are winds,
For they are as well as the soul invisible, just as the ether is invisible. The veins, arteries, and sinews are the bonds of the soul. But when it is strong and settled down in itself, reasoning and deeds become its bonds. When cast out upon the earth, it wanders in the air like the body. Hermes is the steward of souls, and for that reason is called Hermes the escorter. Let's take a look at Hermes. Next image. Oh, look at this. This is great. This is a great image. This image shows the great painting later on, obviously, the focus on vegetarianism, right? Next image. There it is. The soul is divided into three parts: intelligence, reason, and passion. Intelligence and passion are possessed by other animals, but reason by man alone. Next image. Hermes is the steward of souls, and for that reason is called Hermes the escorter. Hermes, the keeper of the gate, and Hermes of the underworld, since it is he who brings in the souls from their bodies, both by land and sea, and the pure are taken into the uppermost regions, but the impure are not permitted to approach the pure or each other, but are bound by the Furies in bonds unbreakable. The whole air is full of souls, next image, which are called genii or heroes. These are they who send men dreams and signs of future disease and health, and not to men alone, but to sheep also and to cattle as well. And it is to them that purifications and lustrations, all divination, omens, and the like have reference. The most momentous thing in human life is the art of winning the soul to good or to evil. Blessed are the men who acquire a good soul. If it be bad, they can never be at rest, nor ever keep the same course 2 days together, unquote. So he emphasized the idea of moderation in all things. He was against overeating. Next image. He believes, of course, that a basic belief for Diogenes Laertius says that Pythagoras, that he forbids us to pray for ourselves because we do not know what will help us. Pythagoras introduces the revolutionary idea that male and female were equal in every way, and so were to treat one another as equals. When it came to classes, while Pythagoras recognized slavery as an institution, he insisted that slaves were to be treated in the most humane way as possible and with the utmost respect. So there you have that. Next image. He said, as long as a man continues to be the ruthless destroyer of lower living beings, he will never know health or peace. For as long as men massacre animals, they will kill each other. Indeed, he who sows the seed of murder and pain cannot reap joy and love. He was a great lover of animals. He also believed in drinking the purest of water, which is part of his regiment. Next image. Um, and what's interesting thing about him is that he believed when it came to sacrifices, he believed that that there should not be any animal sacrifices. He says that the sacrifices should be bloodless, should be bloodless, and so we know of one place historically, according to primary sources, one actual location where Pythagoras did worship. And see that to the right hand side, that box like thing? That's called the altar of horns at Delos. Here, Pythagoras and others would place flour and meal and cakes without the use of fire, with no animal victim. Even Aristotle talks about this in his Constitution of Delos. Next image. And so here it is. You want to take a, so we had a cave now, but here, this altar of horns, right there is where Pythagoras was said to have actually been, an actual place. Okay, next image. Beans were said to be off limits for him. So abstinence, he said that he said beans you shouldn't have. They are like the genitals. Uh, or because they are like the gates of Hades as being alone unjointed, or he also believed that there could be souls within it.
And so when you eat beans, you're eating souls. So there you have it. Next image. So what happens with him is that he has a legacy, and one of his greatest followers was his wife, Theano by name. And Theano wrote a few things. Theano was really he she comes up with this idea known as the golden mean. She writes a work called The Life of Pythagoras after he passes on. She writes a work called On Virtue. She writes a work on cosmology. She writes a work on the construction of the universe. We have a lot of her works. We know a lot about her. So when he dies, she takes over the school. Next image, along with his eldest daughter, which portrayed here by right there, which is by the name Adamo, and she's the one, accordingly, that received custody of all his memoirs. And so systematically rewrote much of his sayings. So what I was talking about before is that Pythagoras, he had said so much. Apparently, he had scattered notes everywhere, and she was the one who ordered them out. Even though his her mom was the one who wrote the Life of Pythagoras, she's the one who systematically went through all his different ideas and beliefs and perspectives and wrote them out for posterity. His younger daughter said that, you know what, unlike my older sister, I don't want to be like her. I want to be just like everybody else, because the older sister decided not to get, have relationships and went to Athens and kind of did her own thing. But the younger sister, Maya, what happens with her is she falls in love with this handsome athlete from Milo, and she marries him. And then all of a sudden she's like, you know what? I can apply Pythagorean ideas to my life as a mother. And so she actually does write a work, and parts of it does survive, on applying Pythagorean to a newborn baby. There's a whole long list, by the way, of Pythagorean women that goes all the way to the first part of the 5th century CE, a whole list of Pythagorean women, and that historians are not talking about, but we have their writings. And I did do a talk of Pythagoras, and I do talk about them and their writings, and I quote about it. So if you're interested in that, look at an earlier talk. But yeah, they exist. They're just forgotten by modern writers. Next image. Pythagoras, of course, came up with other notions. Obviously, Pythagoras proposed that musical notes could be converted into numerical ratios. Eventually, he came to believe that all things could be understood as numerical, as mathematics. The origins of the universe were numerical in essence, too. There you have it. The principle of all things, he believed, is known as the monad or unit. Arising from this monad is the undefined dyad, or two serves as the material substratum to the monad, which is cause. From the monad and the undefined dyad spring numbers, from numbers points, from points lines, from lines plane figures, from plane figures solid figures, from solid figures sensible bodies, the elements of which are four: fire, water, earth, and air. These elements interchange and turn into one another completely and combine to produce a universe that is animate, that is intelligent, that is spherical, with the earth at its center, the earth itself too being spherical and inhabited round about. So here the numbers descend into objects and to a very round earth. At one point, he declared that the most beautiful figure is the sphere amongst solids and the circle amongst plane figures. Now, Pythagoras went further, believing that all relationships, all connections, even those considered abstract, like love, like beauty, like truth and justice, could be assigned a numerical component. He also taught the concept of the harmony of the stars.
Here, planets and stars move following exact mathematical equations, which then exactly correspond to musical notes, and so create a symphony. Next image. Of course, here we have the various shapes here connected to the elements, and you can see here the tetrahedron, right? And going with fire and the air, the octahedron, and so forth. Next image. Here's a kind of image of the idea of the monad that becomes important. Next image. And of course, attributed, of course, is the idea of the Pythagorean theorem, which many say he did. He's one of the things he did not come up with, but there it is. Um, States that a right angle, a triangle, the area of the square on the hypotenuse, and it goes into that, equals, of course, a squared, b plus b squared is c squared, and so forth, yada yada. Next image. Okay, Pythagoras held an unusual belief that beings contain human souls. He even forbade his followers from eating or touching them. According to legend, while attempting to escape from a violent mob chasing him, it is said that Pythagoras refused to enter a field of beans, which eventually, of course, cost his life. Okay, so I'm going to do one more and then we'll be done. But I want to make sure this is my highlight. And this is the next image. And this is a very important one. This is a keystone here. And that's Heraclitus of Ephesus. How could I not have Heraclitus? One of the most mysterious of the pre-Socratic philosophers was Heraclitus of Ephesus, and it must be said that some of this air of mystery may have been nurtured on his part. Eventually, Heraclitus was often called that which is the obscure or the obscure one. He was a citizen of Ephesus. So let's go to, and I know when we hear the word Ephesus, we think of the Ephesus. Next image. Ephesus, as you can see, once again, is close to Samos, where Pythagoras is from. Miletus is where the three other pre-Socratics. There's all the same place. So when we think of Ephesus, we think of Ephesus where all the cruise ships stop off. It's pretty magnificent, pretty amazing. And so we think of Heraclitus of Ephesus. We think of him in connection to the city. So let's take a look at the next image. So we think of him connected to such beauty of Ephesus as this. These are my pictures. The Library of Celsus for the early second century. Next image. Or the Mauses Mithridates Gate that's built by freed slaves of Augustus. Yeah, that's freed slaves of Augustus put their money together to build this. That shows you how much those slaves made, huh? Next image. We think of the grandiose houses that they once have, made very palatial, filled with beautiful frescoes. Next image. And we think of course, the great theater that's connected to Acts, to Paul the Apostle, and so forth. And of course, next image, we think of Artemis of the Ephesians, this exotic form that's small, has polymastic there. So we think of Artemis as connected to it. But that's the first century, second century, third century. Let's go. Next image. But Heraclitus, here it is. So look to the left here. You can see all the way to the left, you see the Lysimachus Harbor. And you see that is where the current city of Ephesus that everybody visits, right? But take a look. If you go back in time, take a look at top, you see possible first century AD harbor. Then you realize that it goes back and you go, wait a second, this water used to be further up. It turns out that the harbor during the time of Heraclitus was all the way back, and the temple of Artemis right there that you see, that's where Heraclitus lived, is right in that area. See that hatchwork right there, those lines? That's the Ephesus of Heraclitus. Next image. And so you can see a close-up of it. See, there it is. Yeah, and so when we think of Heraclitus of Ephesus, this will be important. You're thinking, why you just is this like trivia? I just want you to No, no, you'll see where we're going in a few moments. But take a look. You see the Temple of Artemis right there, the square thing right there. And you see next to it, you see the city that is to the south and to the east. But you also see moving to the northeast, you see this hill. And that hill is going to be important too. Next image. So this is where Ephesus used to be, right by the Temple of Artemis. You can see that singular pillar. Take a look behind, and you see the hill. That'll be important. Right behind that pillar is the basilica dedicated to the tomb of John the Apostle. Next image. This is, of course, the Temple of Artemis. There's me at the Temple of Artemis. Hi, how am I doing? Yep, there I am. Next image. Yeah, now we're looking at the ancient site of of Ephesus where Heraclitus lived. Next image. And you can see there's not they haven't excavated it. It's much of it is under vineyards and peach orchards and cherry places and just beautiful. Next image. You see that castle on the hill. There it is. And that hill also is where early Ephesus was. Also, there's evidence that the Mycenaeans were here too. The next image. And you can see this is looking down from it right here. So down from the hill. Next image. Yeah, this is the site where Heraclitus lived and blossomed. Next image. And I like this picture of the Temple of Artemis. Okay, you'll see where we're going. I'm just giving you some information, and you can see why we're doing this in a few moments. Next image. Okay, we'll put that one down, but we're going to go right back to that one a little bit. That's good. Perfect. So you got an idea here. Now, as I finish up my second water and break a glass. Oh, okay, so what happens here now? Heraclitus. He was a proud citizen of the city of Ephesus, one of the most important cities of Ionia at that time, along the western coast of Asia Minor. Ephesus, of course, is just north of the city of Miletus, where Thales, Anaximander, and Exemenes were from, and just across from the island of Samos, where Pythagoras originated. As for his early life, we know that his father's name was Blossom. According to Digenesis Laertius, he was exceptional from his childhood. For when a youth, he used to say that he knew nothing, although when he was grown up, he claimed that he knew everything. He was nobody's pupil, but he declared that he inquired of himself and learned everything from himself. Some, however, had said, this is a quote from ancient times, had said that he had been a pupil of Xenophanes. So there we have it. The fact, unquote, the fact that Heraclitus possessed a very dynamic personality is beyond question, but he was also very controversial, not particularly liking or agreeing with many of his fellow philosophers. Diogenes Laertius said Heraclitus was lofty minded beyond all other men and overweening, where in one of his books he states as follows. He says, much learning does not teach understanding, else would it have taught Hesiod and Pythagoras, or again Xenophanes and Hecataeus. So he's actually attacking Pythagoras. That's not very nice. His difficulty with many philosophers was that they sought wisdom for only their own sake or satisfaction, without attempting to use their abilities to guide others, declaring at one point, for this one thing is wisdom, to understand thought as that which guides all the world everywhere. In his mind, he believed, as he said himself, there is more need to extinguish insolence than an outbreak of fire. Because of his emphasis on clarity when it came to matters concerning wisdom, he often said Homer deserved to be chased out of the lists and beaten with rods. Yet all too often, Heraclitus contradicted himself when it came to his actual practices of sharing his wisdom. For rather than being accessible to all, he appeared at times as intentionally confusing. Had this deep desire to see justice realized, as well as clarity of thought concerning the application of wisdom, right? Apparently, Heraclitus descended from a proud line of Androclus, the Ionian founder of the city, and was offered the kingship according to Diogenes Laertius, but then abdicated his position and gave it to his brother instead. Strabo does indeed reveal that in the late 6th century, a symbolic king of Ephesus was recognized and was provided with various perks, including the best seat in the game. So maybe this really did happen. Yet Heraclitus lost patience with his fellow Ephesians and their legal institutions. When they banished his friend, especially Hermodorus, he declared that the Ephesians would do well to end their lives, every grown man of them, and leave the city. And because he got pretty upset after this incident, Heraclitus wanted to do had nothing to do with in public life. And when here's the next image. And when he was requested by them to make laws, he scorned the request because the state was already in the grip of a bad constitution. He would retire to the temple of Artemis and play at knucklebones with the boys. And when the Ephesians stood around him and looked on, "Why, you rascals," he said, "are you astonished? Is it not better to do this than take part in your civil life?" This is actually a coin that has Artemis and the Ephesians that's in the background, and these are boys actually playing knucklebones. But Heraclitus did a few things, and we're going to go on that right now. By the way, first of all, we'll talk about how he passed away, and then we'll jump into. Let's look at me. This is awful. A poor guy, right? And then we'll go into some of his philosophies. Okay. Eventually, Heraclius decided not to leave Ephesus, but to leave the company of men altogether. But he had illnesses, various illnesses. Apparently, what he does, finally became the hater of his kind and wandered on the mountains. And there he continued to live, making his diet of grass and herbs, according to Laertius. However, when this gave him dropsy, he made his way back to the city and put this riddle to the physicians, whether they were competent to create a drought after heavy rain. They could make nothing of this, whereupon, ready? He buried himself in cow manure, expecting that the warmth of the manure would draw the noxious damp humor out of him. Dry the damp humor. But as even this was of no avail, he died at the age of 60. So there's other accounts on this as well. Dionysius Laertius says, often I have wondered how it came about that Heraclitus endured to live in this miserable fashion and then to die. For a fell disease flooded his body with water, quenched the light in his eyes, and brought on darkness. Hemippus too says that he asked the doctors whether anyone could, by emptying the intestines, draw off the moisture. And when they said it was impossible, he put himself in the sun and bade his servants to plaster him over with cow dung. Being thus stretched and prone, he died the next day and was buried in the marketplace. So that's the end of him. And you're thinking, okay, Dr. Rietveld, that's great. Uh, is there more? There is. Yeah, but he wrote some great ideas. In fact, we know that he, according to Heraclitus and others, sorry, he put his own book into the temple of Artemis as a dedication to the goddess. So gave her at least a book, but there's more. Okay, there's more. So what happened is this: is that he comes up with an extraordinary idea, and I'm gonna kind of quickly get through because I want to make sure we get to the crux of it. So let's take a look at an image here, and then I want to keep going. He came up with this idea that is very important when it comes to the history. Look, so basically, unlike Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, and Pythagoras, rather than searching for the ultimate substance for the building block of the universe, Heraclitus um, proposed that the nature of all things was change itself, that the universe was in constant flux. With this said, however, Heraclitus used the element of fire as an illustration of this constant change, referring to the fire of Prometheus, but this was only intended as a metaphor rather than the basic material. Hence, the process of change was reality. And the idea of stability, that was the illusion. In connection to this idea that the entire universe was constantly in flux, he declared the famous saying, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he is not the same man." There's other versions that we find throughout the Roman world. Others, another one that goes, "Everything flows and nothing is left unchanged." Another version says, "Everything flows and nothing stands still." So basically, you cannot step in the same river twice. We both step and do not step in the same rivers. We are and are not. Here, Heraclitus is also highlighting the internal contradictions that while things change, they also create illusions of stability, such as the river. Because of the way he observed the universe, many have asserted Heraclitus was one of the earliest dialectical philosophers. Plato, who actually follows Heraclitus in many of his views, has difficulty with this perspective of the universe as is in constant flux, stating, "How can that be a real thing which is never in the same state? For at the moment that the observer approaches, then they become other, so that you cannot get any further in knowing their nature or state. But if that which knows and that which is known exist ever, then I do not think they can resemble a process of flux." So even though Plato does follow a student of Heraclitus of Ephesus, he has problems with this. The fact that Heraclitus used the element of fire, next image, as an illustration for how the universe was constantly in flux proved to be a stumbling block for many who had already heard other philosophers propose the world originated from the world of elements of water, or and so forth. And so a lot of people had difficulty with this idea. Next image. But he himself still believed in this process, this recycling of processes. Next image is going around. One connects to the other. By the way, this idea, this concept that things are ever changing, that you can't step in the same river twice, you may have heard this before. And yes, this very idea we see within Buddhism. So Buddhism will actually go into this idea. So in fact, Heraclitus shares two fundamental doctrines with the early doctrines, schools of Buddhism, that fire is potentially a primary element and that all things are momentary and then pass away. It seems almost too great a coincidence to imagine that two such striking and radical doctrines should have arisen independently in two places about the same time. Here, the confusion of Indian chronology and the obscurity of surrounding the life of Heraclitus has great obstacles, but it is quite certain that there is a connection between the two. Traces of the belief in fire as a primordial element occurs early on in the Rig Veda and are treated philosophically in the Upanishads. The Buddha, like Heraclitus, chooses fire as the most mutable of the elements to represent his metaphysical principle of becoming, and has a long discourse in which he compares the existence of beings to the candle flame that is renewed every instant. Also, Empedocles has the same kind of idea. So there you have next image. But he also comes up with something else. And that's the notion of the logos. Right. So the logos, where do we go from here? So what happens here is that Heraclitus was also the first formulator of the idea of the logos, believing that everything, as much as it was in constant flux, originated from this source. At one point, he states, "I am as I am not." And he states, "He who hears not me, but the Logos will say, all is one." Uh-oh, interesting here. For Heraclitus, this Logos can be translated as meaning everything from the word, Logos, the principle, and the measure, to the account, the plan, the formula, the proportion, and the reckoning. A few quotes concerning the Logos by Heraclitus. One is, "This Logos holds always, but humans always prove unable to understand it, both before hearing it and when they have first heard it. For through all things come to be in accordance with this Logos, this word. Humans are like the inexperienced when they experience such words and deeds as I set out, distinguishing each in accordance with its nature and saying how it is, but other people fail to notice what they do when awake, just as they forget what they do when they're asleep." Yet for Heraclitus, this ever changing universe is living. The Logos is an important concept. This Logos emanates, of course, from this one, from this monad. It has aspects connected to causation, right? It comes from that which is the one who is, he says, who is Zeus and not Zeus, because it is beyond Zeus. It is this one, but aspect of it becomes the word, the Logos. This idea, next image, goes into a, a philosopher by the name of Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish philosopher who lived between 25 BCE to 50 CE, who also then articulates the idea that God, who's he's a Jewish scholar living in Alexandria, uh, contemporaneous to the time of Jesus, lives at the same time. And he has this idea, just like we saw with Heraclitus and others, that there is the monad. And the monad for him, just like we saw with Heraclitus, as well as all the way back to Thales, is the first principle is known as the arche. Okay, well, arche. So from this first principle, this arche, there was, which is his power that is transcendent, right? Plato will say that this power that comes out of the monad, comes out of the one, he will call the demiurge, right? But Philo of Alexandria goes, no, what we're going to use is we're going to use Heraclitus's term, logos, instead of demiurge, to describe the word that comes forth out of God. So for him, the Logos, basically, Philo says the agent of creation is therefore, in accordance with Heraclitus, is the Logos. The Logos used the invisible, intelligible world as a pattern or mold to create the visible world. He describes it then, the Logos was the man of God. He also talks about the fact that there are three powers within God. You have the goodness, which is his creative power. You have the authority, which which has like a regent that moves downward, and you have the logos, which is the word. He says the seeker of truth can only envisage God through God, as light is seen through light. Next image, and all these ideas combine together, and they end up in the Gospel of John. You take a look there, and you have in arche, in the beginning. Oh no, that's not. It's in what? It's the first principle. We've learned now from Thales Anaximander, Exemenes. We have learned from Heraclitus. Arche means, of course, the first principle. In the first principle, it says, was the logos, was the word, and the word was pros, was proceeding to God, and God was the Word. You can see it right there, right? So, be on Yoda like, basically, whole logos would be the Word. Then you would go to was, and then you go the first principle. In the beginning doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. And then, of course, you see, and the Word was pros to proceed, proceeding from God, and the Word was God. So you see how these ideas come together in the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John, now that should strike you as interesting. So you have right from here at the beginning of the Gospel of John a quotation that connects not only the Philo of Alexandria, but it connects to Heraclitus of Ephesus. Next image. What's that, Dr. Rietveld? Oh, according to second century church tradition, second century, this is where John wrote the Gospel of John. What is this place? It's Ephesus. What? Next image. Yeah, it's the top of the hill there. Next image. There it is. Next image. People never get to see this, by the way. You are. There I am. Hi. I appear everywhere. Next image. And if you go down from this particular shrine originally dedicated to the writing of the Gospel of John, when John was supposedly was in Ephesus, not supposedly. It said that he was on top of the hill and he wrote the Gospel of John at the top of the hill. Next image. And you go start going down the hill and you'll see something geographically that's really interesting. Next image. Let's just walk down the hill here. So beyond this oratory, you move down, you see the remnants of a mosque, you see some ruins. Now we're going to keep walking down the hill. Let's keep walking down the hill together, shall we? And beyond that, as you go down the hill, is part of a Seljuk fortress. Let's just keep walking down the hill. Next image. Now going down, okay, we're still walking down this way, and we're heading for somewhere as we're descending this hill. There's the fortress above. Next image. And you come across, oh my goodness, it's a church to John the Apostle. Okay, that's interesting. Justinian really added to it. Next image. And you come to, oh, there's a nice big court area for people to meet, to assemble. Let's keep going down there. And you go into the church and go, hey, look, there is the grave of John the Apostle. We just cut up from the hill, top of the hill, where you had the Gospel of John being written. Now we're going down the hill and you have the grave. Let's keep going down the hill, shall we? Let's descend down this hill. Oh, there we are. We're back down to, oh, the Temple of Artemis. Wait, yeah, Temple of Artemis. There I am. See to the right there, there's the basilica dedicated to John the Apostle. The oratorium where John was said to write the Gospel of John is within those walls of that fortress. And it just as it turned out that John the Apostle is in Ephesus and he's writing about his introduction about the Logos. He is using the patron philosopher of Ephesus. He's using that philosophical idea of the Logos right there where Heraclitus was from. As we already established earlier, oh yeah, Heraclitus, this was the city of Heraclitus. And so we have a direct connection geographically. Things are not by accident. Things are close. And so, of course, John would be writing one of the Johns, depending on your Christian perspective, because sometimes you have three Johns, but one of the Johns attributed or connected to the Gospel of John starts off the Logos, and this is where that idea came from. So it's like the bookends, Heraclitus through Philo of Alexandria to John the Apostle, ending up in the same place where the idea originated. What do you guys think about that one? Next image. And I also want to talk about this. Acts 19:35, it says the city clerk quieted the crowd and said, Men of Ephesus, doesn't all the world know that the city of Ephesus is the guardian of the temple of the great Artemis and of the image which fell from heaven? Therefore, since these facts are undeniable, you ought to be quiet and not to do anything rash. You have brought these men here, though they have neither robbed temples nor blasphemed our goddess. Now, wait a second. You're going, but wait a minute. This story takes place in Acts chapter 19, and Paul the apostle had arrived, and people were upset, especially Demetrius the silversmith. They were upset by the fact that that Paul was suggesting that worshiping images was a bad thing. And since he's in the job of making these silver shrines, this is going to hurt his business. So what happens is they make this great acclamation, Artemis of the Ephesians, which, by the way, is a processional declaration that automatically tells the people of Ephesus that there is a procession going on. And where do the processions always meet? They always meet at some point in the theater. That's where they gather. So basically, by yelling out greatest Artemis of the Ephesians, they all go to the theater and they're all upset, because, this guy, Paul, is blaspheming against them. And a town clerk proceeds to say that they're not blaspheming anything at all. This is not a problem. But why? But wouldn't this be a problem? But here's the thing that you may not know. And that is as follows, is that as it turns out, Heraclitus himself basically believed that worshiping images was wrong. What? Wait, what? Wait, what? Wait, what? So what happens is that Heraclitus of Ephesus, he said he did not believe in praying to images, with Celsus quoting him as saying, persons who address prayers to these images act like those who speak to the walls without knowing who the gods or the heroes are. Celsus continues, and what wiser lesson have they to teach us than Heraclitus? He certainly, plainly enough, implies it is a foolish thing for a man to offer prayers to images while he knows not who the gods and heroes are. Now, here's the thing, is that we know that Heraclius of Ephesus worshiped Artemis like you cannot believe. He hung out there. He dedicated a book to Artemis, but he still thought that worshiping images was wrong. Why is that important? Because this is why the town clerk doesn't worry about it. Because oh, you're against Artemis the Ephesians because Paul's against it because hey, he's worshiping he's saying that you can't worship images. And this, of course, shows you the influence also of Heraclitus still around, where some Ephesians said, well, we don't believe in it either. This is what our patron philosopher thought. We know for a fact from Strabo and Pausanias and others that they still regarded in the first century, that Heraclitus was very much their patron philosopher, the most important one of all. And so there you have it. Next image. We'll put that down, take that down. So we're not going to have a chance to go to Parmenides, but I wanted to make sure that we did get to Heraclitus of Ephesus. I hope you enjoyed this journey as we unpacked so many different levels of the pre-Socratic philosophers. I also want you to realize that we are always standing on the shoulders of some great people. And the fact is that I think for many of us, there's a bit of hubris, a bit of pride that we have that how far we've arrived at. But I want to say something, and that is as follows. Think about this. We are here because of the accumulated knowledge of all the others in the past. These Greeks had very little to work with, and yet they came up with so much beyond our imagination. They were coming up with ideas and perspectives that we take for granted in our current modern day world as part of reality, essential to reality. And yet we just kind of say, well, they're not relevant. They're archaic. They're of the past. But we wouldn't be here and thinking the way we are without them. And for that, we all owe them a great amount of gratitude. Thank you so much and have a great night.